Oh, I have been looking forward to this for a while. These are two of the people that were sort of among the most influential in my early days. Not my early days, but the early days in which I was kind of departing from the church, starting to question all my worldviews. For those of you who don't know, I started to travel immediately after high school. I worked different jobs, farms, ranches, hotels, whatnot, teaching English. And I was a sort of rigorous Christian, or I had a strong faith, but I didn't yet have this kind of comprehensive, coherent worldview built up from fundamental properties or whatever. So I encountered all these people with different views, and I realized I love these conversations. I was writing freelancing fiction, sci-fi, fantasy to support myself after working all the jobs and volunteering and other stuff. And I realized that I loved philosophy, and I started to kind of branch out into philosophy. Nowadays, I write a good deal of philosophy as well for work. I would like to stop all of that and do YouTube and do my own writing. That's kind of the focus of my new phase. That's why I've been uploading a little more recently. That's why I need your advice. So, for example, intros like this. I'm not sure entirely how to do this. This is one of the first videos I've done kind of just reacting live like this, unscripted. I could probably even stream this. I just don't know how. But I'm looking for advice. When do I talk too much about myself? When do moments like this bore you? When do people want to hear more about me? Obviously, as my channel is quite small, I'm still trying to kind of appeal to more snappy, momentum-filled stuff, appeal to whatever's going viral at the moment. And yeah, I feel a little bit less confident just talking, rambling. I do have a tendency to do that though, which is why some of my content is pretty long anyway, but I'm looking for advice. So let me know what you guys think. The point is though that I discovered Alex in these days when I was sort of branching out, and I realized, Jesse, if you're going to have these arguments with people, discuss life and meaning, you're going to have to appeal to things that they find also meaningful. You're going to have to make arguments that don't just appeal to the Bible or don't assume even, objective morality or free will. Some of these things that were so fundamental to me, so kind of natural, I started to realize weren't obvious to everyone. So I got into philosophy, debates, whatnot, reading. Good. And it led me to people like Alex O'Connor. This was probably, 7 years ago. And Jordan Peterson. A lot of people were influential, but these were two of them. And, obviously come from very different places, started off very different. It's interesting to see something of a convergence. If you compare Alex to, say, Stephen Woodford from Rationality Rules, you can see clearly Stephen Woodford, I like him, I appreciate him, but in my view, Alex is just going much wiser direction. He's only going to continue to grow to be more influential and relevant. He comes with this curiosity. He started this podcast. He's having these long form discussions. He's able to shift like language games a lot. And so he'll speak to someone like Dawkins and use all the sorts of phrases, and he resonates with Dawkins' concerns. And so he's able to kind of hone in the conversation on what's relevant and able to move forward in some meaningful way. Same with Peterson, same with a lot of different people. Now he's doing some stuff on politics, psychology, consciousness, mindfulness. So I think that's literature. That's fantastic. And Stephen Woodford, and a lot of the atheist YouTubers, they just stay in this space of kind of knocking down arguments. On the other side, you have people, like capturing Christianity and whatnot, who is just more apologetics, counter-apologetics, mockery, debate. And I really think Alex is going in a good direction. I actually think he's somewhat surpassed Peterson in some regards, because Peterson, he does remain in this kind of political, defensive, reactionary stance, when he feels like his worldview is being threatened. He also does kind of seem to struggle to acknowledge what other people are even talking about when they're concerned with dogma or when they're concerned with the sort of language he uses. He seems to just pretend, I would say, oblivion to the fact that most fundamentalists, most of what religion has been, if you're to use kind of his pragmatist, I guess, existentialist definition of things like God and meaning and truth, then you have to acknowledge that what religion has been something other than what he's talking about. He needs to acknowledge that he's engaged in a philosophical venture here, however much people mock him and Harris for not using, not being philosophers, not using the proper terms, not referencing the literature. There's a lot of philosophers in the past that did the same. They didn't reference past thinkers. They built their own worldview, their own language game based on what they were concerned with, especially in the last 200 years, with a lot of the more literary, poetic, postmodernist philosophers and thinkers. You get this broadening into sexuality, psychology, sociology, literature, and we need to acknowledge that philosophy, it's just kind of an umbrella term we use to capture a lot of things. I don't think it's foolish to say that Peterson is engaged in a philosophical venture. He's describing a philosophical form of Christianity, and it's useful to describe it that way. Why? Because, well, he needs to acknowledge it, and all the atheists complain about it, and all the Christians complain about it. Everyone recognizes what's going on, but then if you go to the philosophical community and you're like, you dare say Peterson's a philosopher, of course you get somewhat mocked. I think he needs to return sometimes to establish this foundation, which he did much more frequently, I think, in his old lectures about what is actually truth, the existentialist definitions of truth, pragmatist theory of truth, argument from natural selection in terms of how things are filtered up through all this informational processing system into concept. Things are filtered up to here and then become concept, and that's kind of meaningful or true in a more meta, a more transcendental way than just the particles that make up the information processing, say, the mechanistics of the information processing. So that's a very rigorous argument that has been made by a lot of great thinkers, and I think he needs to acknowledge that that's what he's doing, and that's not what religion has been. Anyway, okay, that was quite a ramble. See, like that sort of thing. Let me know if that's too much. I really want to know. Let's get into it. Yep. Okay.
What do you think the advantage is, if any, in relationship to the emphasis on skepticism?
I'll give you the official and the unofficial story. The official story is that cosmic sort of implies universe, space, big thinking.
Okay, let's get ahead to the
cosmic
stuff
from
of
a marketing
note.
side, but it also has this marketing side, but it also has this. It's an interesting allusion to the combination of revelation and critical thinking that actually makes up actual thinking, right? Because the problem with being concerned with a vast plethora of ideas is that many ideas are misleading and wrong. And so you have to learn how to combine that openness and curiosity with the capacity to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
And that's the utility of skepticism. I mean, it can degenerate into a kind of argumentative nihilism. That's the downside. But properly applied, it's separate.
I would say it can. I'll probably let him keep going. I don't know if that's super important right now, but again, Peterson tends to take these tacks of speaking about all the ways that, say, reductionism, skepticism, just trusting reason, intellect, can go wrong. And it's legitimate. There's valid things to criticize there, but it's also noteworthy that he does so kind of preemptively before even establishing what skepticism might be.
Separates the wheat from the chaff, right? And the purpose of that is to keep the wheat.
Well, skepticism can only ever be essentially destructive because you're being skeptical of something. Somebody's putting something forward and you're sort of responding to that with skepticism. And so for a lot of people, if skepticism is the thing that you do, then you sort of end up chipping away and ending up with nothing, whereas skepticism is really supposed to be a tool that you use. It is destructive, but in the way that you might sort of carve a piece of marble.
Yeah, right.
You're intending to get a statue out of it at the end.
Yes. Well, that's the thing to always keep in mind, is skepticism in the service of something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a tool. It's a methodological tool. It's not a world.
Good.
Not a world.
You mentioned
a methodological. This is good. This is something I've been thinking about as well. I suspect if you take a Dillahunty type, a Dawkins type, Sam Harris, loads of other people. Sam Harris, not so much. I'll talk about him in a bit. But if you take this hyper-skeptical type, I think they have to recognize, I don't think it's going to be enough. I don't think it's going to be enough to sustain most humans, because we all have different psyches, and not all of us are able to appreciate life or find meaning in these sort of dry, just forming these models, pinning them up on the wall. Okay, now we understand the world better, and we're going to move forward and make the world a better place. Dawkins seems to be a very rationalist, biologist, so he seems to find this meaningful and sustaining, although he did name his podcast The Poetry of Reality, which I find interesting. Dillahunty, though, just deconstructs everything, famous in debates for just being this kind of staunch skeptic. I haven't assumed that, or I haven't agreed to that, and it's powerful. He's a sharp guy, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to sustain most individuals, and I don't know if it's going to be enough, certainly, to build the kind of uniting, motivating worldview that we need moving forward in this new world where we're so aware of the flaws of religion and the weaknesses, and we're so aware of science and how it helps us. I don't know if the skepticism is going to be enough, and I think it's much easier to mock the non-skeptics. You have the last 200 years, we have to realize, philosophy shifted, from analytic philosophy to now. You've had this period of the existentialists, Sartre, Camus, the postmodernists. Philosophy broadened out, and a lot of them were more authors, literary. They were poets. They started talking about sex and sociology and psychology. A lot of this more soft philosophy that it does attempt to tease out kind of the more, what would you say, phenomenological realm. We cannot describe the human experience, and therefore I believe we cannot model the human experience solely with rationalistic or skeptical language. And that's where I think they're spot on here. It's a tool. It's like you're paring away the extra layers or something to see where things truly connect and are causally linked. But I don't know if it can unite and bind in a generative way. And I think that is the realm of creativity, say, or leaps of logic, leaps beyond what we understand. Kind of that's the realm of the artist. That's the role of this fringe group of people in society that takes all the risks and gets things wrong. And I think Peterson uses a lot of his religious language to this end, and I think he needs to be appreciated for it. And I think it's easy to mock, but we mock this at our peril, because I don't know if we have something to replace. I know this is the refrain of everyone nowadays. We don't have something to replace religion. We're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We don't know what we're tangling with. We don't. Well, I'll continue. But dogma is still generally bad, I would say. And I think Peterson dances around and uses these terms, shifting in and out of a truly dogmatic, fundamentalist sort of speech, worldview. In which case, I think it's very dangerous, and he does this to kind of appeal to these people, and he switches back kind of into the psychologist, evolutionary biologist, whatever worldview, in which case he appeals to these people, the rationalists.
In your thinking in relationship to that, because you mentioned just before we actually went on air that had you come to see me a couple of years ago, you might have been more inclined to, I'm putting words in your mouth to some degree, so correct me if I'm wrong, to strive for a victory or to make your point, something like that. And you alluded to the fact that your thinking around that has changed to some degree. I suspect that's probably a consequence of experience. So what's changed?
In part, it might have something to do with becoming a podcaster and speaking weekly to people. And you can't keep up that energy. Or you can, but it becomes totally unwatchable, and nobody wants to engage in that all the time. I think there are times when it's worth doing. And to be clear, I still like to disagree and do so essentially unapologetically and bluntly. And that can still come across as quite rude. But I think that the way that I would think about a conversation is that, well, what are we about to do here? A debate. We're about to debate an issue, and I'm going to try to win. And that's, and not even, I mean, maybe there's sort of an element of pride in there. You want to win for that sake, but also you really think, well, I want to win because I think I'm right about this. And if I don't, then, I must have just not expressed myself properly. I think what I probably meant when I was saying that is that I would have had more of that cap on than now, after having so many conversations with so many people and realizing that not only is it more constructive for myself, I've learned a lot more. And now I'm here like, hey, I might learn something today. That would be great. Even if I just learn something about what your worldview is. But also people listening just unanimously say that they prefer it. It's a much...
Well, the skepticism. So one of the things you learn as a therapist, for example, is that being right is not very helpful, especially when you're trying to help someone, because whether you as the therapist is right has very little to do with the positive outcome for them.
Okay, so he's starting with this tack. It's good so far, but he's starting with this tack of being right is of limited or even of anti-use. Why? I'm guessing this will go towards the whole thing of kind of what I was saying. We need to produce new ideas. We need to move forward into an uncertain future. Chaos. And that requires risk, reaching, faith, taking what we know and subjecting it to newness will always reveal areas we do not know. That requires, in these moments, we must work on assumptions or faith claims, and this is where death lurks. So trusting something subconscious. This is where death lurks. And trusting something subconscious or archetypal or past traditional has proven extremely useful, hence its place in our biology. This is an irrefutable. This is a he presents things very strongly, but he's been talking about lately how Dawkins cannot possibly deny this. And it's just like, okay, now jump from there to divinity or to what people mean when they say religion. This is the vital thing, and they're going to talk about this quite a bit. I've spoken of this.
You still want to maintain the skepticism, and one of the ways of doing that in the manner that's helpful is that, like, if I'm talking to you and you say something I don't understand, that's the right place to be skeptical, because if I don't understand what you said, well, it might be my ignorance, but it also might be like lack of clarity and pointedness on your part. And so one of the advantages of disagreeing with someone is to point out to them in a positive way
Lizzie,
where they're
oi,
lost in the...
cosa vuoi, cane? Cavolo. Oh, one more thing on that. Yeah, he's been on this kick. I listened to part of this, by the way, as I was cooking and cleaning this morning. And he's on this, I feel like he's on this kick recently of saying more often, we don't even know what that means. And that's for sure, or, and that's a non-starter. So there's kind of these very dogmatic, assertive statements, which I find unhelpful because they obfuscate or shut down the discussion right where the question actually lurks. And I did find myself wishing Alex would push him a bit more on some fundamental philosophy stuff, epistemics mostly.
Because if you're sufficiently lost in the fog, you tend to run into sharp objects, and that's not very pleasant. So, but the skepticism, and this is obviously what you alluded to, I would say, as a consequence of learning from the podcast, is the skepticism should be in service of rectifying your ignorance rather than in service of making your point or winning the argument. Problem with winning a bloody argument is that the victory can seduce you into thinking that you were correct, and you're never sufficiently correct, right?
Yes.
And so...
Interesting. Probably true for the purpose of the conversation. Although ironically, from Peterson's kind of pragmatist approach, I may talk about this more later. I'm not sure how much of my audience is going to be, philosophically aware. That's good. Great, Jesse. I'm not sure. Yeah, pragmatist theory of truth. The idea that truth is determined or weighed by, in terms of use, what it is used for. So it kind of shifts the attention away from the correlation to an actual fact or an actual mathematical pattern manifest in reality separate from the observer, and it shifts the attention to, well, if the perceiver wants to do this or means this when they say this thing, and if they succeed and if it helps them survive, then it reinforces their perceptual mechanism, and evolutionary biology through the eons has produced this perceptual mechanism that perceives things precisely as we perceive them. This is a very Petersonian argument. So you see a cup, a drinking object, you see a weapon, you see the predator you run from. You don't see things at the level of the cell or the atom or the universe. It seems kind of basic, but it is basic to us because of how we've evolved. So pragmatist theory of truth, along with many other kind of pragmatist type things, would filter truth through this lens of, what are we trying to do with it? How can we use it? And if we can't understand everything, and if the world is chaos, maybe we need some sort of narrative mechanism, or this what does he always say? Like a low resolution picture of what's going on, or this idea, this concept of the future as an entity we negotiate with, because that's the only way we can actually conceptualize the future, especially when limited in a situation of chaotic jungle. So, ironically, he's saying you're never correct enough, and that's true because you need to push the bounds of what you know, and you need to continually be open and explore, and that's why I think dogma, religion, is bad. But ironically, also from a pragmatist theory, you could say anyone who survives has been correct precisely to the degree that they need to. And you could say our dogmas were useful in the past until now we have this religion and technology, and now it's precisely, we're able to see how it's harmful. So actually, we are correct enough to continuously move forward. I don't know.
I don't like
If things are measured by continuously moving forward, survival, which is kind of the evolutionary, the more rationalist side of Peterson's argument.
debates. I don't like debates fundamentally. I've never really enjoyed them. I probably, when I was really young,
Yeah.
before I stopped doing this when I was about 23, I would take a certain amount of pleasure in being able to obtain intellectual victory. It was also a way I defended myself when I was young, and it was effective. But it's not the optimal way to conduct a conversation. This is one of the reasons why people like Rogan are so successful, because Joe pushes point, but he always does it in the service of learning.
Yes.
He doesn't do it in the service of victory.
Yeah. I think you've probably put your finger on it there. But what you were saying a moment ago about precision, about sort of thinking clearly and understanding somebody else clearly, I think the reason why I'm excited to speak to you today is because you're someone who celebrates being precise in your speech. And I've always appreciated your desire to make sure that you're really understanding what somebody else is saying. I've made attempts in the past to...
Does he? I agree somewhat. I do wish Peterson would acknowledge more the disconnect he has with the physicists, the mathematicians, everyone, the people who use this other sort of language. I wish he would acknowledge more what's going on. He's a psychologist. He should understand the way the things they're concerned about, the dogma, the fundamentalism, why choose this text above all others? Why choose this text? It's not because you believe there is a divine God in the sky that, created. It's because, why? You ask him and he starts to talk about, well, it's because, maybe he would say love and truth is the distillation. Like, that is the Father, and this is the Spirit you embody when you blah, 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 and Christ is the highest ideal we could... Okay, other religions and myths have these things. Now, do you believe there's something unique about this one? Like, is the love and truth unique to Christianity? It might be. I think there are some good arguments there. But again, the only way we'll be able to discuss that is by collapsing or reducing the Bible to the level of these other things and saying, why is love and truth a good argument? And that's going to be methodological. That's going to be more scientific analysis. So... yeah, I think he needs to be clear about when he's interpreting, which is what he's doing, and when he's actually making a faith claim or asserting a worldview such as, not this is what this means or this is how we should look at this spirit of truth, spirit of Christ, but when he's actually saying, I believe this happened and that should change our view in this way. I don't think he acknowledges where other people's concern is all the time sufficiently.
Yes.
And I've made attempts in the past to try to understand your worldview.
Yeah,
your
I
religious
some
worldview.
of them.
And I made a video essay. And some of the things I said there, I think, at least one thing in particular, I'd probably think I was wrong about. But what I was trying to do there, I've seen that people would ask you on interviews and podcasts, do you believe in God? Do you think that Christianity is true? And it was sort of, you would sort of struggle to answer the question. And I thought to myself, well...
people come at the question with a priori commitments about what they think truth constitutes.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
There must be something important.
That can be a problem, but if your point is to reveal that to people, to reveal, there's these systems below you which you don't even understand, that give rise to this perceptual apparatus and these concepts, and you have to choose some sort of, narrative structure by which to frame it, and you don't even acknowledge that, and that's if he's going to say this to a Dawkins type or an atheist type, he needs to acknowledge that what they're concerned about is not that, but what it does to all these people who believe the dogmatic thing.
People come at the question with a priori commitments about what they think truth constitutes.
Yeah.
So if someone comes with an a priori commitment, he has to acknowledge that. But I don't think a lot of the event, random question askers at events, audience people, are really engaging with him on this. And then the people who do, I wish they would engage with him perhaps on it more. The people who do that debate with him or that sit down in podcasts, I wish they would just confront him and, okay, you're saying we act this out without knowing it and that we can't deny it. But then they can just go in and pinpoint exactly where in the religion or the religious history or how it has reformed or the sacred text, where the flaws are, where the inconsistencies are. And they could say, here and here and here and here, we've reformed it. Why have we reformed it? We've reformed it partly because of this driving ethos of love and truth, but also because we impose these external things of the Enlightenment values and rigorous science And love and truth isn't actually perfectly encapsulated in Christianity. That's why we bring all these other thinkers in and these interpretations and these other maybe even myths. So
that's a big problem.
There must be something important that's being left out of the sort of precondition of that question or conversation. If it's so unimaginably difficult to answer, Well,
I'll give you an example. I watched that essay this morning, right? And I also wanted to talk to you about your discussion with Dawkins.
Yeah.
So people ask me, for example, do you believe in God? And I think, well, I don't know what you are driving at with that question, because I don't know what you mean by believe. Most people, modern people, believe that a belief is a description of accordance with a set of facts.
Sure.
Right. Well, I don't think that's what belief means in the religious sense in the least. So I just think that's a non-starter.
Something to do with what you act out, right?
It has to do with what you believe is what you're willing to die for.
Interesting. I would say what you act out is very much in line with what he said in the past.
The existentialist, truth is a way of being. It's not a collection of descriptions. So it's more embodied, from the Piagetian point of view. And so truth is reflected in what you act. So Nietzsche would say, for example, it doesn't matter what you say. It matters what you do. And if I want to figure out what you believe, I don't ask you. I watch how you act. Perception. And you can't not see the meaning of the object. Well, you can. If you're a scientist, you can sort of separate out the object from its meaning. That's actually what science does. It tears the object away from its meaning. And then, of course, there's nothing meaningful left, and so science ends up value-free. But that's because the meaning has been torn out of it. Now, there's technical reasons for doing that, but Binswanger's point is, don't kid yourself. You see the meaning first. Here's an example. That's when you get back to the problem of what constitutes real. So I could say, well, you've evolved to see the meaning. Well, then we might ask, well, if you've evolved to see the meaning and that's kept you alive, is there anything more real than the meaning? Because somebody who's a materialist would say, well, no, the object is more real. It's like, no, it depends on how you define real. It might be that the most real thing about the visual cliff is that that's a falling off place, and that its secondary description as an object, a hole or something like that, that's something you paint over top of the primary reality.
And that goes to the pragmatist theory of truth thing. There's different theories of truth. How do we discuss reality? What are we exactly trying to get at? Some people say we're trying to get at whatever corresponds with a fact or a set of facts. We're trying to get at something that is unfalsifiable. We're trying to get at, pragmatists would say, we're trying to get at, is this a cup? Well, it's made of, pewter and whatever. And okay, if I shatter it, and then if I use it if I use a shard as a weapon to defend myself, to kill something, to skin something, to make a hat, to maybe I use a tiny shard to sew the hat. Is that tiny shard a needle? Is it a cup? Is it a piece of a cup? And it is maybe all of those things. Certainly it's a piece of a cup. It's a piece of what used to be a cup. Now, if it's going to be used in the future for something entirely different, for a space shuttle, they use like ceramic on space shuttles, right? Is it a space shuttle? So you orient things in time and space according to use. This is, again, it can seem kind of silly, but I would say it's kind of a fundamental part of his view is that, yeah, if you're acting something out, without even knowing, it's there in your structure, in your very perceptual structure, preconditionally. So it's part of who we are. The religious, the phenomenological, the transcendent, divine revelation, psychedelic experiences, faith, the thrill of battle. These things are in us far deeper, adrenaline, far deeper than the rational processing of our mind, which just evolved kind of most recently. So we have to acknowledge that these forces shape us in a way we cannot describe solely with rationalistic language, with skeptical language.
Mentally, it's what you're committed to or live for, if you think about it.
We're committed to and live for, yeah. Oh, yeah. So he's saying people come and he's like, you don't even know what you mean with this question. I understand that because people will ask me if I'm a Christian or I have people on every side telling me, don't say you're an atheist, you're not an atheist, or don't say you're an agnostic, you're not an agnostic. And it's usually, it's tough to choose the words. People can always nitpick because I just try to choose the words based on the conversation. And some people tell me, don't, just live your truth, be yourself, just stay who you are boldly, don't concern yourself with the opinions. I don't concern myself with the opinions of others. I'm very confident in what I believe. I've thought it through. And I know where it ends, and I'm open at that point. But, if I'm speaking to kind of my older Christian community from my youth, it's very useful to say I'm an atheist because it kind of orients exactly, or quickly, rather efficiently where I am. And then if we have more time and if we're in a conversation, I can explain more. If I'm speaking to someone very into philosophy, I might say something entirely different, like I'm an existentialist, consequentialist, whatever. If I'm speaking to kind of a militant atheist, I'll say, I'm an agnostic. I'm fascinated by religion. So words are things we use to relate to people. And it's like a word is like a network of associated ideas and feelings and intents, and based on someone else's network, you're trying to connect. You're trying to connect the networks. So when someone asks Peterson, do you believe in God? When Dawkins asks him, and when the fundamentalist Christian asks him, Peterson needs to realize they're asking a much more similar question than he thinks he's answering. Now, if his whole shtick is we need to realize what we're missing, we need to realize what undergirds this whole perceptual apparatus, then he can answer complexly, and he does that. And I think he is fairly direct a lot of the time, and I think people do just kind of refuse to see it or brush it aside. So I think he does a decent job of conveying what he's concerned about as, a psychologist and as a, interpreter of these things, and, whatever, mythologist. But, I do wish he was a little less selective or kind of doggedly blind to the criticisms, or I wish he did better at acknowledging where other people are coming from, because they're also coming from a complex place, and I don't think he does that all the time.
As life in the most extensive manner. It's a matter of commitment.
So I understand what you mean in the religious context.
Yeah.
So, but religion is a big topic. Religion is a mighty, area to be talking about. But when I talk about belief in a more mundane sense, like I believe that this chair exists.
Yeah.
Like that is a belief that I hold. I sort of can't help but hold that belief because I can see it. Right?
Well, that's a place where your action and your statements align.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is
you
why
believe in the chair and you're sitting in it. It's like, fair enough.
Which is why I totally agree when you say that what you believe might really be what you act out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when people are looking for essentially definitions, and just a second ago you said, well, what is it to believe? And you said, well, what you believe is what you're willing to die for.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to die for my belief that this chair exists.
Maybe
in a broad sense. If not believing that the chair existed required me to sort of give up my trust in my sense data,
right,
then I might literally die by accident by sort of walking off a cliff because I don't trust my eyes anymore. So it's
also not something that you're likely to forego given your role, let's say, as a rational skeptic.
That's right.
Seriously, like it's a commitment that you've made to a certain view of reality.
But you understand surely that when somebody asks, do you believe in God? Although they're asking the sort of subject of the belief is a much more grand entity, the word belief itself, for them, at least in their question, even if you think it's an inappropriate question, they mean something much more mundane. They mean like you believe in the existence of
hard to know. It's hard to know what people mean. Like one of the things I've noticed, for example, is there are no shortage of Christian trolls, right? I mean, there are atheist trolls and there's engineering trolls. There's lots of trolls, but there are Christian trolls. And the Christian trolls, when they ask that question, and it's often the Christian trolls who ask that question, what they mean is, are you in my club?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And
yes, okay, he doesn't like that. That's fair. What does mean, guys? But when people like Alex or people like Harris or Dillahunty ask him this question, and he gives this long, wiggling answer that frustrates them, it's very understandable that they would be frustrated because we do know what they mean. Now, he's saying you act out something that you don't recognize, and so when you try to grapple with that belief, you don't even know how to start. So the words you use and what you think you mean in this, prefrontal whatever part of your brain isn't actually what your being manifests, what your being would mean if it understood itself fully. He can say that, but we do know what people mean, and people are trying to get at truth. People are trying to get at truth with this new world in which we analyze things in this way and discuss them in this way on this stage, and we need to be open about the fact that we are trying to get at truth in some sense. Now, we can discuss what truth is, but when he says, I don't know what it means to say something happened, it's not discussing truth. It's not getting at... It's not getting at the disconnect between that brain and his brain, the questioner and him. It's getting at... It's just kind of reasserting his thing about the whole conversation, which is what they're trying to arrive at, what they're trying to prove or disprove. And I find it unhelpful if he just says we can't even know what any of these words mean.
My answer is, I'm not even sure you know what club you're in. So there's a trap in the question, which I don't appreciate because I don't like questions that have traps in them.
Yes.
Now, not everybody who's asking that question has a trap, but many people do. And so I find that off-putting, let's say, because it's manipulative. In terms of that descriptive belief, that's something we could go into. I think we should do that because it does get to the core of the matter that you were attempting to untangle, let's say, in your essay.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of and I had to sort of piece together different things you'd said in different interviews. And I suppose the reason I had to do that was because I didn't have you in front of me. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity now. It seems to me that when you speak of God, you mean something like that which is at the, I don't know if you'd rather say the basis or the top, but the basis or the top.
Both metaphors.
Of a value hierarchy. And it begins with the recognition that anything that anybody does requires some kind of value. Even just to do something as simple as sitting in a chair or picking up a glass.
Well, you don't do anything without it being oriented towards a value.
Exactly, right. And so even to perceive the glass is something you've spoken about before. You know, why do I see the glass as one object? Even though it's got multiple parts, it's got a side and a bottom and a top. I see them together in a way that I don't see the cup and the table as one object. Well, you said before, it's because I can grip it. It's sort of functional. It's because I can use this cup. And the reason that I see it in that way is because I can then drink from it. And the reason that I want to do that is because I sort of value my health. And there's sort of a value regress that goes on.
Always.
And more broadly, this comes out in the question of like, you know, why are you writing an essay? To get a good grade. Or why do you want a good grade? To get a good job. Why do you want a good job? To get money. And you keep going back and back. It has to terminate somewhere.
That's right.
Because otherwise...
It terminates in the goodness of being, the wild abandon with which we embrace existence and say and believe it is good, and that's the spirit of love as acted out by Christ, and it has to be nested in the spirit of truth.
Otherwise, there would be nothing to sort of lend that value.
Well, otherwise you'd always be in an infinite regress. Further down, right? You just die of questioning. Or it would be infinite.
Yeah, you literally, it's the kind of regress in which the value that you have for A actually borrows the value from B. You don't value A at all without B. So it doesn't get it without B, and B doesn't get it without C, and C doesn't get it without D. So if that went on infinitely, there's nothing to give.
That's fair. It's good so far.
The entire sequence value in the first place.
Right.
And so there's got to be something at the basis here. And then you said, at least on one occasion, that we'll call that place, whatever's at the top there, we'll call it the divine.
Yes, this is what he says. So we'll call that God, and that's God, and that's what God means. It's the same thing, and that's the spirit we walk out when we embrace. He uses this sort of language, and when people try to call him on that, or when Sam says, you know, that's all fine, and we can accept all of that, and that can be a beautiful, meaningful, even the best way of interpreting blah, 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 but we have to acknowledge it's an interpretation. We have to acknowledge that where it crosses into dogma, we can go astray. I wish they would engage, because that's where Peterson kind of says, fair enough, man, and I wish they would engage there. Kind of what exactly is it that Peterson is proposing about the texts, about what religion has always been, about institutions and what we should do with them. It feels kind of funnily, in the skeptic's way, he's defending against attacks and criticisms he sees from other things. He's kind of reducing them without... I don't know. I mean, he's all about we need something motivating to move us forward, and that's what the religion has been. I just don't know if it's going to be enough to keep trumpeting it in the same way in this new age. I don't think we can believe it. I don't think it is as perfect, as free of dogma as we would wish. I think the love and truth is a good distillation, but, well, let's see.
Yes, and you said we'll make that a matter of definition.
Yeah.
Now, I'm fine with this.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that what you're doing is you're giving a definition of God that makes him
partial definition,
or makes it him whatever unavoidably exist, and also makes it a quite different entity to the entity described by a great deal of, for instance, your Christian listeners, who will say that God is not the basis of a value hierarchy.
See, and then this is where Peterson will say, well, I'm not sure that's what they mean, or I'm not sure that's what they really mean. And this is just exactly right. Religion as it has existed, in reality, the effects it has had, the institutions, the beliefs people have held in their minds, they truly are what Alex is referring to here. I think there's this tendency sometimes among modern people. I've heard Zizek do this. I've heard Peterson, what's his name? Dugan? Alexander Dugan? He's interesting. I'll look at him soon. there's a lot of people that say, you know, the ancients didn't believe in their gods the same way. They didn't have the same dogmas. They realized they were playing out this kind of narrative. I simply don't think that's true. We know so much of human psychology. We know so much of what we've believed, the children we've sacrificed, the wars we've fought, the strange rites we've done. I do not think you can say religion, Christianity, any religion has been, on the whole, this kind of philosophical, very abstract interpretation, certainly not an interpretation that can be integrated with the modern scientific understanding.
God is an omnipotent, omniscient, agential being with consciousness that intentionally brings about human beings and sent down a physical man to sacrifice his life in order to save us from our sins. Now, that means that when someone asks you, does God exist? And you say, well, look, I think that's almost an inappropriate question. At times you sort of imply that you don't even believe in atheists because you sort of act as if you believe in God. If what you mean by God is just...
Well, Dawkins himself admitted he was a cultural Christian.
That's another matter, because that's much more specific. I mean, that's cultural Christianity, right? This is just... This, but although
it's a reflection of the same problem.
But it's a key point as well. Cultural Christianity, that's very specific. I think, again... Why does Peterson choose this specific myth, this specific way of interpreting it? I think he has to acknowledge that if you're going to choose it, if you're going to say it's superior, you have to reduce it to the level of all these others, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and say, okay, this is better for these reasons, and you're going to be then engaged in a discussion of reason, of science.
When a Christian says to you, I'm being very clear that that's what I mean by God, I don't know if you do believe in the omniscient, omnipotent, agential being, but... If you start talking about the inevitability of believing in some basis of a value hierarchy,
not so obvious.
You're talking about something different.
It's not so obvious from the traditional Judeo-Christian perspective that God is properly conceptualized as a being.
That's probably right too.
So it's tricky, right? Because one of the ways that you can approach God traditionally is in relationship to a being, but that's a veil. So why do I say that? Okay, so let's speak about it religiously first. Then we can speak about it conceptually. So there's a tremendous insistence in the Judeo-Christian tradition that God is outside of the categorical structure, right? Like seriously outside. Elijah, the prophet, establishes that God is not in nature. He's not in the earthquake. He's not in the conflagration. He's not in the storm, right? So that doesn't mean that nature doesn't speak of God, but it does mean that whatever God is not in the natural world. Okay, now we can extend that. Not bound by time, not bound by space. Well, does that make God a material object? Because when people say, is God real, which is a variant of the question, do you believe in God? It's like, well, God's immaterial and outside of time and space. So if your definition of real is material things in the domain of time.
A definition of real believed by many religious people would be a God that interferes with the material, first of all, that performs miracles, certainly hears prayers, that not only created the material, but planted our physical bodies with an immortal seed of consciousness that's going to outlast our bodies, and that there's a spiritual plane, perhaps an immaterial plane, but some sort of plane that we will be able to access and interact with. You know, this, what he's saying now does get you to something sort of like a Kalam, you know, something caused the universe. There is something beyond matter and space-time. I don't know, again, if that just should lead to the sort of Christianizing of that entire conversation.
In space, then we're not talking about the same thing. Now, usually people approach that question of belief with...
Now, if you're open about the fact that I'm starting out as an academic to interpret the Christian texts to bring more meaning and health and appreciation to society, that's good. And I think that's what he's doing. And I think he is relatively open about that. And a lot of people, as I said, dismiss it or ignore it selectively. But I wish he would acknowledge it when he's confronted by these very intelligent thinkers who are jabbing at specific points. I don't feel like he does that.
Some materialistic framework like that in mind, even if they don't know it.
Yes.
The Christians, let's say, who put this question forward in the hope of getting the answer they want to hear, are materialistic and Enlightenment minds, even though they don't know it, because they have an implicit definition of what constitutes real. Is God...
So he's trying... Okay, that's interesting. I'm curious where he'll go with this. Like, will he appeal to some sort of Gnostic view of, like, there was this group of early believers who understood that it had to be melded with personal experience and, you know, personal connection with the divine, and that it always is going to outstretch whatever the physical material language that we like to use to understand and interact with the world. I just don't think that's entirely true. I think people very dogmatically for the last 2,000 years, well before the Enlightenment, have believed in the sort of God that wants them to, burn witches and to do this and to this, and that curses you and that you have to do this or you're not saved. People believed this stuff.
Real? It's like, no, God's hype.
People had deathly fear of hell. I don't know. I wonder how interpretations of religion will continue to evolve as we continue to become more and more secular. A lot of people struggle to appreciate just how brutal war has always been, just how ready we all are to become slavers in our biology. It's in there, we did this, Nazis. So I feel like we think we're so separate, but we've evolved a long time to get to the last 10,000 years, and in the last 100 years since digital or electricity or whatever, we've evolved very slowly. So
is God real? It's like, no, God's hyper real. That's not the same thing.
I think that the physicality of God is an interesting question.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament tradition, it seems to evolve as far as I can see. If you look at some of the earlier descriptions of God, you've got a God who walks through the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
You've got a God who has a council of angels and the accuser. You have a sort of, it's being at least conceptualized as a much more physical being. And as time goes on, God becomes less localized. And I've heard a lot of theories as to why that's the case. I've just done an episode on my own show.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true exactly. I don't think there's a clear historical progression like that. There is a constant tension between God as ineffable and then God as manifest in a manner that's comprehensible, right? And so Mircea Eliade had mapped it.
that's true. I do like that. I do like the description as a tension. I think a lot of things are tension. Check out my Kierkegaard video if you want to hear more on that. Tension between the material and the phenomenological, tension between the individual and the collective, tension between order and chaos, between what we know and what we don't, obviously everything. I do agree with Alex generally. It's interesting because Christ especially was a very intimate, personal figure. And, a lot of the recent Christian movements have been all about personal relationship with Christ. And he's a person and he knows you. And there is some uniqueness of Christianity there about it's unique for God to become a person, to act something out very relational, to reach towards us and sacrifice, offer himself for us in a forgiving way. It's not just some standard we have to meet and hope for his forgiveness, hope for absolution. It's something Christ acts out for us, reaches out, calls us to be like him, to clothe ourselves in him. This is a pretty unique God, and it's very personal. And the Holy Spirit, the comforter that's going to inhabit us. This is pretty personal, and that seems to have some element of the physical or the immediate. But he also became much more abstract and overarching, this kind of, all-father beneficent. Now it's like the Kalam, the starter of all things, the embodier of natural law, very different than the pillar of flame in the desert or whatever, very different than, the earlier God. I think it's very well established among academics. I'm curious what Peterson would say to this sort of person who talks about, what is it? Syncretism, dietic? What? Syncretism and how, Yahweh and Baal and El became one, and one was a storm god and a war god and had the consort Ishtar or whatever that was then left aside and then became overarching. And I wonder if he, accepts that a lot of these things come from early paganism or if he doesn't. He must. People have asked him things like, if all humans ceased to exist, would God still exist? And I forget what he said exactly, it was years ago, but he probably said something like, I'm not sure, or I have no idea, or that's the question, isn't it? So he doesn't believe in this God in the same sense of God was actually walking through the garden. Now, he's saying that Christians are trying to interpret the Bible retroactively in the literalist way we would now, and that's not how it was. That's not how it was meant to be believed. And I just don't think he's correct there. I think humans always have believed. That's what religion has been. It's been the belief in this way of these things. That's why people are so wary of religion. That's why we prefer a metaphorical or philosophical or just wise, open, undogmatic reading.
To some degree. So he was very interested in Nietzsche's proposition that God had died. Mm-hmm. Most people, including Nietzsche, regarded that as like a unique historical event. There was a religious tradition, the Enlightenment arose, in consequence, we became skeptical about God.
I think that's true, generally. That's true.
And in 1850, the philosophers decided that he was no longer necessary or
It is very unique. Yeah, we're living in a fascinating time, guys.
real. But Eliade, who is a brilliant historian of
Like
religion,
we're on the cusp. We're on the cusp. It seems. I'm not exactly as prescient as like. This could be a period of 100 or 1,000 years in which we're on this cusp of uncertainty, and I think we have the potential to just explode out into the universe and explode out into completely different sort of being and way of living, or, well, destroy ourselves, I guess, would be the other option. But for so long, things have been so similar and moved so slowly, and especially even before agriculture, the state of life on the earth, the state of sentient, whatever, conscious experience on the earth was so slow moving in its change. And now agriculture to, whatever, metalworking to boom, 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 accelerating insanely until now we have AI and internet and nuclear and contraception all in the space of a few years, a few decades. It's insane. It's an exciting time.
has noted that this has happened many, many times, that God has vanished, disappeared. And one of his explanations for that is that a God that's too ineffable, so that's completely outside
This is interesting. So he's disagreeing.
of the
Is that true? I just don't know enough about history. There have certainly been groups. You hear atheists say there were always atheists. And it's true to me, it seems. There were certainly always groups. A lot of them were kind of esoteric, acted out rituals, psychedelic sort of things. I don't know if they were necessarily atheist. But there were always groups that interpreted things in different ways. And there was always a tension between the, ineffable personal acting out of things and then this abstract overarching all-father. And always a tension between institutional and individual faith, and always a tension between. I don't know if there was I don't know if the scientific method and true skepticism. I don't know if that was always dominating or always in tension in the same dialogical way through societies. I think it is a new thing that is very clearly sweeping across in an unprecedented way. I don't think that can be denied.
completely outside of the categories of time and space, let's say, and who doesn't make himself present as a being, who doesn't have a heavenly council, who has no hierarchy between the pinnacle and Earth itself, tends to float off into space. It becomes so abstract that you can't have a relationship with him, and then he disappears.
In many ways, this is what Christianity provides with the New Testament and the figure of Jesus. And that's why I think for a lot of Christians, the more important question for you and the question that they're interested in, and you're quite right that a lot of people are like, I want to get you on my team.
Yeah.
I have no dog in this fight. I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
But I know that a lot of Christians are frustrated when they begin asking about Jesus, who's a much more physical entity, right? It's a real human being. It's someone of flesh and blood. It's someone who's physically crucified by the
It's
Romans.
a very different question. It's very different question.
And then is seen as a physical entity, at least according to the canonical tradition, by his disciples after he died.
Yeah.
So when somebody asks you, do you believe that happened? And when I've seen you ask about that question, you tend to still speak in terms of the psychological and the mythological. I think the frustration is that, as you've just said,
these are I don't mind frustrating Christians on in that regard either, because the truth of the matter is, with regard to the gospel accounts, that the mythological and the historical are inextricably cross-contaminated.
Sure.
There's no pulling out the historical Jesus, right? That's a nonsense.
I don't know if that's true. In earlier texts, and this is how myth evolved, and this is how we got kind of the modern religions, that we got the convergence of religion from earlier paganism, fractured paganism. And it's very true that reading, history, reading mythology. What is that? And it's very true that reading myths and such, you have to understand how they thought differently, and piecing things together in the current way we think about history is not easy or possible. But the reason we have our current methodologies, our scientific methodologies, is they are far more reliable. They explain far more. They are these models that are open to change. They don't close us off to total paradigm shifts in terms of understanding how the universe works, understanding how we work. And if you read, especially the early myths, in Peterson's interpretive way, you're going to have to make these leaps that are closing you off to the other interpretations or the other myths, or just pure and simple, this is made up, being able to acknowledge that. And then Jesus is a slightly different thing. I mean, it's a more modern thing, and we have, idea about who wrote it and when they exist in relation to him and how much they knew, primary sources, secondary sources. I think it's a little bit strange to say he can't be tangled out from the mythological compared to, Adam and Eve or whatever.
Just that's a non-starter. And why that is, I don't know. It's very mysterious. It's very hard to understand. As is.
Wait. He's been saying this more lately. It's a non-starter, or we don't even know what that means. He's been saying those things, I think, a bit more often recently. And I feel like that's kind of a cop-out when you just say, we don't even know what that is. The mythological and the literal are inextricable, and the historical are inextricable, and we don't know why that is. I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know if that's true. I think there are entire cadres of humans dedicated, academic-minded humans dedicated to untangling these precise things.
Are let's say, the accounts of the resurrection. Okay, so what do I think about that? Well, I think that denying the historical reality of Christ I think that's just a fool's errand.
Of course.
I don't know why anybody would bother with it.
So a man exists called Jesus. We
Yes.
have that much.
Now, there's a claim that is attributed to Christ that he is the embodiment or the incarnation, the fulfillment, let's say, of the prophet and the laws.
Yes.
I think that's true.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What does that mean? Well, I think it's in the Gospel of John. I think Gospel of John closes.
If you start by saying you think something's true, but you have to work out what it means, then it feels like you're starting from a place of, I'm going to interpret this however is best or however most meaningful. And then, okay, well, what does that mean? What is best? What does meaningful mean? Oh, I don't know. I'm going to try to work that out. It feels like you're still just starting from the place of the science or the skeptic. It doesn't feel like the sort of thing he conveys it is when he says, Dawkins is 95% Christian or things like that.
With a statement that's something like, if all the books that were ever
Yes.
written were written about the gospel accounts, that wouldn't be enough books to explain what had happened.
Yeah, if
Yes.
all the things that Jesus did.
Yeah. And there's a truth in that. The truth is that profound religious account is bottomless.
Mm-hmm.
And the biblical representations are like that. There's no limit to the amount of investigation they can bear, not least because the text.
I would say one can have an individual spiritual journey that is bottomless, but it is something that has to be acted out and experienced. I would say, again, that's kind of this dichotomy, the materialistic and the phenomenological. I would say we could know everything about how the Bible was compiled, everything about the brain state of every single person who contributed to writing it, everything about how it does or does not relate to any true, actually existing entity of God. We could have a complete understanding of all of history up until this point. You could be omniscient up until this point. You could have been God. And then if you're snapped into this body and you still have to move forward, experience is bottomless, and the religious exploration of your experience would potentially be bottomless. But again, he's just defining that as religion. It's like the stepping out into experience in tension with this, in communion with other humans that you have to get along with, and blah blah blah. And you have to have faith that it's worthwhile, because then you'll slip into nihilism. He's defining the religious in this way. But I don't think just literally how these texts were compiled and everything that went into them is bottomless. I don't think he's argued that, and I don't think you can just kind of assert that.
Text itself is deeply cross-referenced. So there's like...
Yes, but anything compiled in this way is going to be. And we could add all the authors from then. Dante, he talks about, Dante and Milton, whatever, him. People 1,000 years from now, you could add all of them, and then it would even be more cross-references. That's something we bring to this, because we are these pattern-seeking beings that have to live out this life, that take these ideas, act them out, test and tweak them as we go. It's not divine. It's not divine. It's not a divinely sparked thing.
There's an innumerable number of paths through it. It's like a chess
Unless you change the meaning of divine.
board. And so it's inexhaustible in its interpretive space.
That's true.
And that's a problem too, because it means it's also susceptible to multiple interpretations, including potentially competing interpretations.
I think a lot of people interpret Paul, for example, the earliest New Testament source, as saying that if Jesus did not literally rise from the dead, if there was not a man who stopped breathing and then started breathing again, then your faith is futile and you're still in your sins. That is, Christianity is undermined. Now, that means that, and Paul doesn't say sort of believing that that's false is really bad. He says, if you do not believe this proactively, then your faith is futile.
That's the problem I have with that.
If you don't proactively believe that yourself, then I think when a Christian asks you, do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus? Are you a Christian? I think you must be committed to saying no, at least under that interpretation of Paul. And even if you're not sure, I mean, it's fine if I say to you, do you think that a man physically rose from the dead? And you say something like, well, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there, but I think it has a lot of mythological significance, or I think that maybe it happened in a different sense, or it happened in the sense that good fiction happens, then fine. But it needs to begin with that caveat of the simple sort of, historically speaking, I don't know. And I know you don't like to pull out the historical Jesus from the mythological.
That's a good objection.
But it's an important question to ask.
No, of course. It's a very good objection. So I just did a...
It's good when he says these things. Fair enough, or that's a good objection. I wish he'd just pause a moment and acknowledge and say, I know what you guys are talking about. Like, he knows. I know what you guys are talking about. And you're right. Now, what am I offering, or what am I saying we need to cling to that loses? And I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what he's trying to do. Maybe that's his entire endeavor. But it's in these sort of conversations where it just hops back and forth that I feel like people get frustrated for valid reason.
A seminar on the Gospels with a crew of about 8 people. And it was the same crew that walked through Exodus with me with a couple of variations. And we spent a lot of time on the resurrection accounts, for example. And of course, that was the toughest, morsel to chew and digest. The thing about the resurrection...
It has to be real. It truly has to be real and literal in Christianity. A lot of the Old Testament especially, you can interpret very flexibly if you want. It's not like the Quran that it's the exact word of God. You can say that it was all divinely inspired. You can read it evolutionarily if you want. But the idea of the Christ and the Christ being flesh and resurrecting, that's key.
The resurrection accounts is that they're all... Look, so I could say something like this, which will just annoy people, but it doesn't matter. I believe the accounts, but I have no idea what they mean.
When you say you believe the accounts, do you mean, and I hate to be sort of pedantic here, it seems pedantic, but do you mean you believe that these are things that happened such that that's a strange
I know
you don't
thing.
Like that. Let me put it this way. If I went back in time with a Panasonic video camera and put that camera in front of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, would the little LCD screen show a man walk out of that tomb?
What's he going to say?
I suspect yes.
Oh. Really? What does he mean? And again, you feel like this is like a Muhammad hijab answer where it can appeal to both sides. Because, the Christians will say, he believes, and that's, hoorah. And then the atheists, some of them may have a field day with this and mock it, but some of them can just be like, or he can say later intellectually to an intellectual crowd, I mean, Christ was real and something happened and we have these and these accounts. And certainly I believe that he was crucified. And, it doesn't actually have to mean that the story happened as the religious would have us believe. That's interesting. I feel like you have to pin him on these things because, again, what did he say back here? What?
Peace.
The thing about the resurrection accounts is that they're all... Look, so I could say something like this, which will just annoy people, but it doesn't matter. I believe the accounts, but I have no idea what they mean.
Yeah, when you say that, and whatever Alex says after, do you believe they happen? He's like, I don't like that. When you say that, it's basically just taking someone. There was a fundamental part of humanity, saying, wow, guys, this is really important. It's had a big effect. We need to acknowledge that the effect goes far deeper than we know. Studying it a bunch in your life, using all the terms, building this language game by which you can connect this thing, this religion, to everything and show how it's that kind of the encapsulation or the finest, highest encapsulation of what we're striving for. And you can do that with anything. I think Sam Harris's example of a cookbook or a recipe was good. You can do that with any myth. So why are you choosing this one? You could say about Hinduism, Rama. Was Rama really, banished by the jealous stepmother into the woods? Did he live in exile? Did Sita really go to accompany him? And you could look at that and you could say that is hyper true. And I believe it. It's more true than any one life or more true than any one event because it's this extracted pattern that has all these different facets and dimensions that have been woven through generations of human storytelling. And so it reflects more about us than anything else. And of course, if you're banished into the desert and you don't have if your wife goes with you, that's the sustaining flower of you, and he abandoned his kingship. That's taking the shuffling off of, divine inheritance in order to go out and face yourself and build something and, discipline of your own. And then that's the place in the wilderness where your wife will be taken from you by Ra one. And you have to, if you don't have close people around you and your precious brother to fight with you, then you're not going to, you can do that about anything and say that's more true, but then you can also say, I have no idea what that means, and it just kind of saves you from having to argue in the way everyone else is trying to argue. Again, legitimate and probably what we need at this time, but there's just that disconnect that needs to be acknowledged.
When you say you believe the accounts, do you mean, and I hate to be sort of pedantic,
Yes.
So that to me seems like a belief in the historical event of the resurrection, or at least of Jesus leaving the tomb, which means that when somebody says, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? It doesn't seem clear to me why you're not able to just say, it would seem to me yes.
Because I have no idea what that means. And neither did the people who saw it. And neither did the people who
and neither did. So then what do we know?
saw it.
What do we know has to start with skepticism, academic review of these texts, of the brain, of why we have these concepts.
Have you ever broken address? This is super easy. One button with the nut. That's e.com/Jordan to learn more.
Let's approach this obliquely. Let's say the miracle of the loaves and the fishes.
Yeah.
Okay, so people will say, well, do you believe that happened literally, historically? It's like, well, yes, I believe that. It's okay. Okay, what do you mean by that? That you believed that? Exactly.
Yeah.
So you tell me you're there in the way that you described.
Right.
And
what do you see?
What are the fish
What do you
doing
see?
exactly? And the answer is you don't know.
See, I'm not sure that's true. For the vast majority of religious people through history, through what religion has been as an institution, the things it has asserted, I do not think people would have trouble answering that. Okay, maybe it's like, I don't know what the fish look like. That's a little more specific. But people believe that, there was a garden, there was an apple, there was a tree in the ways we think of when we say garden, apple, tree. They believe there was a flood, there was an ark. They believe there were animals 2 by 2. Maybe a lot of people probably believe a lot of that stuff was more metaphorical, but when it comes to the person of Christ, they very much believe he is the Son of God. He was God become flesh, the Word become flesh. There were a bunch of people and he performed a miracle. People still pray for miracles, for healing, for multiplication, for visions, prophecies. They believe these things are given by God. They believe they can speak to God and that his voice speaks back to them in their mind. People believe there was the Son of God that came to die on a cross for us, that he was preaching to people, that they didn't have enough food, that he prayed and there was more food. That's what they believe. That's what they believe. They don't believe if you're rightly aligned with the divine order, if you're rightly aligned with love and truth, and you're ministering to people, and you have built up such and such a blah, blah, blah.
Notion about it at all. You have no theory about it.
Sure.
So your belief.
They do have theories. That's what religion has been. That's what people are criticizing. That's what people are concerned with. That's why Dawkins can debate a theist, and they'll debate, was the ark actually possible? That's why he will just disconnect from that entire conversation, and people have trouble engaging with him or find frustration, because when he says we have no idea and then he goes and talks about all these theories and these interpretations, people are like, okay, well, should I critique those theories and interpretations, or should I critique what the religion has always been? Because you seem to be trying to defend what the religion has always been, but you're talking about these theories that are more just kind of like psychological things that sound pretty good.
Belief is, what's your belief exactly?
Well, I think a Christian might say something like, my belief is that I have no idea, looking at those fish, what I would see in the process of them being converted into enough food for the 5,000 to eat. I have no idea what I would see. But I do know that what I would see is the fish end up being spread amongst the 5,000. In the same way,
right.
If I opened up the...
That's an okay answer. I feel like he could have pinned it down a little bit.
The water jar. What would I see when the water became wine? I have no idea. Does it sort of blend from one color into another?
Someone just needs to ask him, have a list of questions. Do you think, to get at really the heart of what people are concerned about, do you think most Christians believe this? I wonder if he has more annoyance towards the atheists or the Christians who ask him and are frustrated with him. Because in this conversation so far, they've talked mostly about the Christians, which is interesting. Yeah.
suddenly snap? Does it disappear and then reappear? I don't know.
Right,
But what I
right.
do know as a Christian,
As a Christian, there are beliefs about God, what he did, what it means for us, that it does not seem like Peterson holds, that you don't ever really hear Peterson espouse, that all the other Christians do believe and espouse, and he needs to acknowledge that even if they don't understand how those beliefs formed, that's what they believe in this surface part of their brain, and that's something he disagrees with.
you know.
Right,
But what I
right.
do know as a Christian is that I would see something at some event in which when I look at the beginning, it's water, and when I look at the end, it's wine. And I mean actually. I don't mean that Jesus turning water into wine is some kind of, inextricably mythological story, and the question of whether it happened sort of doesn't matter, or maybe it happened in a meta manner, or maybe it happened in a hyper reality sense. No, I would be, as a Christian, committed to saying that it happened historically.
I'm more inclined, rather than to believe, I'm more inclined to understand. And then when I
That's nice. I wish I could understand. No, but I get his point. But again, you can say that about anything. You can say that about anything. Understand the place this has in the human formation, and you will be wiser. And that's the Christian ethos. That's the truth seeking.
I hit the limits of my understanding, I think. I don't understand that. Now,
yeah.
do I believe it?
But you have a bunch of people asserting things and acting things out and believing things that don't align with that understanding. And the atheists and the Christians are arguing about whose understanding is better. And if you think they're both wrong, you can come in with your psychologist stuff, and you might be right, but you still have to acknowledge that the conversation they're having is important because it has to do with real-world actions and how we do policy and what we do with our time and teach our children.
Or not believe it? I think often, especially with regards to
I mean, maybe he'd just say everyone should listen to him. True.
biblical matters, let's say, I have a suspension of belief and disbelief.
Yeah, and that's fine too.
I
of
think
course.
part of the reason that I've been able to be an effective interpreter of the biblical texts and a relatively scientific interpreter is because I approach the texts with respect, the same respect that I would approach a lab animal. It's like, I don't know what this is. Like, I seriously don't know. And I'm not going to come at it with axiomatic assumptions that are unquestionable. I'm going to try to see what's right in front of my eyes. I'm going to try to see what mystery reveals itself if I take this phenomenon seriously. This is one of the things that I find puzzling, for example, about Dawkins, because Dawkins formulated the idea of meme, which is, by the way, the same idea as archetype. It's exactly the same idea, except he just stopped. It's like, okay, there are memes. They're selected for. Okay, selected on what basis exactly? Does that mean there's a hierarchy of memes? Are the memes more likely are the memes that are conserved more likely to be, what would you say, viable organisms? And if they're viable organisms, are they microcosms?
This is really interesting in terms of the survivability, because there's a point, I've spoken to Richard Dawkins, well, a number of times, but twice on my podcast. And the second time, somebody pointed out to me that there might be a point of agreement between you two that has been overlooked, which is that, I don't know if you've ever come across the evolutionary argument against naturalism, or the argument from reason, the idea that if you're a materialist, you can't trust your reasonable faculties. So Alvin Plantinga formulated this very well, very, very geniusly, I think, in saying that if you believe...
Yeah, no, I don't know if I necessarily agree. I still need to figure out exactly which arguments are which, like presuppositionalist, contingency, Plantinga type. But there's these arguments, in order to even trust your faculty of reason, you have to presuppose some sort of designer that designed you to pursue reason, to be able to understand reason, because what? Natural selection does not select for truth-seeking or, clear seeing or objectivity. Natural selection selects for fitness. And this is ironically kind of Peterson's very argument, is that natural selection built this kind of narrativizing mechanism, this mechanism that collapses the vast quantities of information in the world into these things that can be perceived and interacted with. And through the years, those become these archetypes. They work into our subconscious. We tell stories about them and act things out, and it's in this tension. But yeah, there's this Plantinga style argument that's like, you can't even trust reason because you don't believe there's a God. You believe we evolved through this kind of random process. And so you're not even selected to see things as they are.
That if you believe that evolution by natural selection happens materially, what does natural selection select for? Survivability. So if you're a materialist, that means that the very rational faculty that you're using right now evolved not to be sensitive to truth, but to survivability.
Yes, that's right.
And if that's the case, well,
definitely.
Why do you believe in the truth of evolution? Well, because you've been rationally convinced of it. But the thing that you've just assented to, the belief itself has just undercut the process by which you came to that belief.
Look, there's a whole...
I've never found this too compelling, to be honest. I'll note that, I mean, all the theists, apologists who forward this argument are probably accepting natural selection. Peterson himself, makes this argument for God from natural selection. But they would just say there's this kind of overarching entity that designed and wished, truth seeking to be possible and accessible, and that that's the only way we have the faculty of reason. Matt Dillahunty has these, they do a much more extreme job, but Matt Dillahunty has these debates against like Matt Slick or Cy 10 where they just go over and over again, how do you even know it's good? How do you even know you exist? How do you even da-da-da? How do you even da-da-da? And look, every conversation in my view presupposes reason. Reason is the basis by which we can do everything. It's self-evident. That's what I would say. It's self-evident. A equals A. There is no conceivable situation in which A can be at once A and not A. There is no conceivable situation in which A can exist and not exist. Tautology, everything is kind of built up from these things. So, I mean, you can tack on to every single argument. The atheist could caveat by saying something like, what I perceive as this volume button and what I perceive as this green light indicates that the speakers are on, and what I want to do when I do what I call switching this button with what I call my thumb is create a situation in which those boxes over there that I call speakers can no longer transmit sound to my ears, and I interpret the sound as having meaning because of how we could tack on these caveats to everything, but there's always, you could just say like there's some sort of sensory experience such that this part of my brain that is connecting to these words thinks this sort of thing that the words mean. And you could just always say that about everything. Some sort of sensory experience such blah, 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 blah. But you could say that endlessly, and it would just take the conversation right back to ground zero. The skeptic has more grounds.
I do not know what that word was that I just said.
The reason, what I mean when I say this is always going to be what I mean when I say this. And if I give it to you and you see it the same, then we can talk about it and reach a conclusion about how it works and if it does or doesn't work. The reason is always undergirding that. I don't think it's a circular argument, basically. You're using reason to prove that God is necessary for reason. That's just circular. That's simple. Wow, Jesse, you just rambled a lot, and you're just saying reason shows that God is necessary for reason. It's circular. Everyone presupposes reason when they talk, when they open their mouths, when they even think they can connect with this other entity across the table from them. That's it. I mean, it's self-evident. It really, truly seems self-evident. If we're going to be skeptics about everything, I don't think we can even start talking about God. You can't even say reason would be necessary for God. That's the first leap to even get off the ground.
The New England Pragmatists figured this out in like 1880.
Yeah, now I think this is a fascinating. I think it really is just a.
It is.
It's exciting. It's a novel.
That's for sure.
Brilliant.
That's for sure.
I asked,
it's actually a point where Darwin and Newton do not come together.
How do you mean?
Well, the Darwinian definition of true and the Newtonian definition of true are not the same thing.
Here's the thing. You had a conversation with Sam Harris.
Yeah.
You've had a number, but one of them.
And he's alluding, I think, to this idea that what's true depends on how it's perceived and how it's used by the being that wants to perceive and use it to bring a better experience or more meaningful, survival moving forward into the future. That's good. I think this is going in a direction where I'll be able to say more from the perspective of maybe Advaita or, Sam Harris type meditation, consciousness, how conscious experience is self-evidently meaningful, and how that's kind of this infinite and undeniable thing by which we can ground a lot of our phenomenological side. And then, if you say that's nested in a purely mathematical side, then you have your worldview, and I think we can do a lot with that. I think that's probably where this will go. Let's see.
I don't think it was a live event. I think it was before that. You're talking about truth.
Yeah,
and you're
very
trying
awkward second talk I had with him. I was extremely ill.
It was. It was awkward to listen to because it felt very much like. And I remember at the time thinking, what is this Jordan Peterson talking about? Like truth is like Darwinian. Truth is about like survivability. Well, what do you mean? Truth is
true the way an arrow flies.
Yeah, right. And now I asked Richard Dawkins about the evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Yeah.
I said, well, how can you know that what you believe is true? And he said, because believing true things makes me more likely to survive.
Hey,
And
watch where you go with that.
I didn't catch
man.
it at the time, but I thought to myself afterwards, it was one of my commenters on Patreon actually had mentioned this. He was listening to Richard, and I said, but okay, maybe, but sometimes it's at least possible that something that's false helps you to survive. The rustling in the bushes, believing that that's a lion every time or a tiger, even if it's not.
It's interesting. You could posit some sort of supercomputer, universal supercomputer, knows everything, embodies every particle, whatever. Every single time the rustling in the bushes is actually a predator, it would know to get away. Every single time the rustling was not, it wouldn't care, and it would survive. And it would survive better because maybe the rustling in bushes is a prey, or maybe it means like a wind is coming and you have to do something specific. The more knowledge you have, supposedly, the better. Peterson's whole thing is based on this idea of finitude. A lot of philosophy is based on this idea that we can't know everything, that we have to have this hazy area where we kind of piece things together and guess and take risks. That's, what was I saying? Oh no. And there's an evolutionary argument for that. And because we are finite, it's the sort of brain we have that requires that we have this extra anxiety for this thudding in the dark or the rustling in the bushes. That's where anxiety comes from, supposedly. Loss aversion. You can be 100% dead, as Peterson always says. So because of the sort of brain we are, we can't know every time it's a creature. We can't certainly know every time it will be a creature for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. So we have these genes that code for extra wariness. And then, if we were to strip them away, we would just be snapped up by a predator like that. So we need to have this structure in order to deal with the much more chaotic universe that extends beyond our little finitude here. So the structure is necessary, maybe the most necessary thing for a being like us, finite, that's experiencing. And maybe that experience, the experience of finite beings like this, is the most meaningful thing a universe can have. What do we want to just be a supercomputer? So maybe it's the most true and the best way existence can be, and it requires this kind of reducing mechanism, this fiction, this belief in a fiction, this anxiety for the rustling in the bushes that helps us survive because of how it structures our brain. But it's not actually the belief in the false thing that's helpful, right? It's the structure.
It helps you to survive because that one time that it is, you're still going to run away. And it costs you nothing to run away when it's not a tiger. So believing it's a tiger, even when it's not.
So what we're doing in the last 200 years is realizing we have this structure, and then some people are saying, okay, well, let's try to separate ourselves from this, the dogma of this structure as much as possible and do science, and that's very useful and can help us. Some people are saying, like Peterson, no, this structure, like the religion isn't believing in these stories in this way. The structure inside of us is religion. We are religious because of this structure. These patterns inside of us and how we react and how they sustain us, that's what the stories actually are. And both are needed.
It's going to help me to survive.
That's why we have a negativity bias.
Yeah, and Dawkins says, well, yeah, of course there are some circumstances where believing something false could be beneficial to survival. And I said, well, how do you know that 2 + 2 = 4 is not one of those? And it seemed as though he was just saying that believing that would not be advantageous to our survival, which might well be true. But if that's the case, then suddenly I'm listening to what you're saying about...
Dawkins is just not too much of a philosopher, right? Doesn't he just not see too much use in it, or he just kind of wants to concern himself with other things, and that's just how his brain works?
Truth being more sort of Darwinian and related to survivability.
Yeah, maybe that's not true. He was one of the great horsemen or whatever, but I don't feel like he engages tons with truly philosophical arguments. And yeah, we should probably devote most of our energy to science anyway. Science, because it's useful.
And I think maybe you two would agree there. And then I think, well, why is it that when you sit down with Richard Dawkins, you find it difficult to have a conversation with each other? And
well, I think it's partly because we don't know each other very well.
That's
right.
Also
and so,
true.
and also, there are things he knows that I don't know, and there are things I know that he doesn't know. Now, I would say, in my defense, that what would you say? I'm more of aware of the things he knows that I don't know than he is of the things I know that he doesn't know, right? So, for example, as far as I can tell, Dawkins doesn't know anything about the Jungian tradition of literary interpretation. And that actually, if you're going to talk about religion, that's actually a fatal flaw, right? So
Yeah. Of all the horsemen, I don't know who was best against religion, because they just didn't approach it like Peterson or someone like Jung or Maciej Eliade or someone who is trying to learn from it. They approached it because they were concerned with what religion is and does and the institutions and the fundamentalists, which is a very legitimate concern. And I wish Peterson would acknowledge more that that's the spirit of religion as manifest in our ongoing reality. Like, sorry, that's needlessly wordy. I wish he would just acknowledge that that's what more people are really about and more atheists are really concerned with. But yeah, Harris was probably my favorite. Hitchens and Dawkins especially, they're just not super philosophically rigorous, and then Dennett is philosophically rigorous. I think he just has a lot to say that's more interesting outside of the religious stuff, counter-apologetics. Harris was funny, dry, witty. He has this appreciation for the spiritual and the transcendent, the mindfulness. He knows a decent bit about other religions, which is helpful. Yeah.
Right. So, and, he's called me, for example, drunk on symbols. It's like, well, the imagination is a biological function. And it has a structure and a purpose. And it has its own logos, its own intelligible order.
I wonder what people who know would say about, like, what makes humans truly unique. I've been thinking about this. Because in some ways it seems like reason and imagination, or reason and abstraction, creativity, are almost the same thing, are kind of the same thing. Someone like Pajot would probably say, we don't see the world through reason. Reason is something we have to kind of step back, detach from ourselves, and reason is an abstraction. And he would say we see the world through, I don't know if he would say symbols probably. That's very interesting, because you could picture like an animal or a computer. You could picture them being kind of the same. It's just an impulse, input, output, like one-to-one translation. Processing, basically, not even translate, like an anemone, you just touch it and it retracts or whatever. Anemone? Oh no. Guys. Oh, there's a little bug on the camera. I don't think that's interfering, right? You could picture one-to-one like a computer, and you could picture at some point animals started being more complex and using energy in different ways, whatever, being more mobile, and they started needing to be more aware of their environment, and we developed this like collapsing mechanism by which we see and move through the environment in a more aware way. Now, what is that awareness? It's like there's this translation space. I used translation last time. It's like a transmutation space. It's like a simulation space. You have the world, sense data, information comes in, and then you represent the world in your mind, the future, the possibilities, the past, who you are, what you want, and you try to do certain things with it. And you are detached from that process to enough of a degree to know that you are thinking to decide one course of action, not the others. It's no longer just this input-output, one-to-one. Like you hear a noise and you flinch. You feel heat and you take your hand away. That's the animal side. And this more recent stuff by which we simulate or reflect, I don't know what to call it, simulation space maybe. That's like the self-awareness. Sartre, what does Sartre call it? Like reflective and non-reflective consciousness. Reflective is like when you're aware, you're thinking or whatever, aware of something. And non-reflective is like when you're just experiencing it. That's kind of the human thing. And it's very fundamental to both reason and creativity. You step out of yourself and you look, what do I want from the world? How does this work? How does this model work? My brain is going to react with adrenaline now, and I need to resist its urge by blah, blah, blah. That's a reason. That's kind of this disassociation from emotion, this disemoting, anti-emoting. But then creativity or imagination, or like empathy. Empathy is a huge human thing. Like you look at someone's face and you mirror, you have this ghost of their sensation in your own head. That's like this emoting sort of simulation. But it always seems to have to do with like removing ourselves from ourselves, the patterns going on here, and simulating some sort of pattern outside. That's a very human thing. What were they talking about?
And if you're not aware of that order, that doesn't make me drunk on symbols.
Imagination. Oh yeah, drunk on symbols. So what is the symbol? A symbol... I'm going to ramble too much. Maybe I'll do a separate video on this. Check below. And let me know. Continue to let me know, like, if I'm rambling too much. I don't know what audiences want. I feel like I have things of value to add, I hope. And I don't want to ramble too much or get lost in my own sort of indulgence, but I also don't want to just sit and stare at their video as they talk. I want to make sure I'm adding enough. I don't want to overbear you guys. So let me know. But drunk on symbols, it's interesting. Symbols, semiotics, like what are they? They're tools we use to convey some sort of pattern in here to some sort of brain over there that's capable of reproducing the same pattern. So like I want to convey, I am angry. And then we use these symbols, the word angry, to convey to them. and then it kind of leaps into being in their mind, and that's how we transmit information in this mutating, abstract, indirect form, which has made humans so powerful. And is that the core of who we are? Is that the core of imagination? I once met this Finnish guy, great guy, who said he thought life was more meaningful before we developed language, in like the hunter-gatherer days or the ape days or whatever. And I that's so counterintuitive to me. I just can't imagine that. Guys, I mean, you just think of that as being closer to an animal, and you think we have lives more meaningful than animals. That's kind of the whole thing. And I think that's still true. I think language is so valuable, but it does bring a lot of this noise and dogma and bias and, the capacity to empathize, to compassionate, to compass someone is extremely the same as the capacity to hurt them, to hate them, to be cruel.
It just means you don't know what you're talking about.
Now that frustration that you appeal to there when you hear Richard Dawkins, I think Terry Eagleton said that listening to Dawkins on theology is like listening to somebody write a book about biology whose only knowledge of the subject is having once read the Great British Book of Birds.
Yes.
And okay.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. But I don't know if Dawkins pretends really to be a huge theologian guy.
And okay, fair enough.
But that actually turns out to be a real problem. And it's a problem with regard...
These things more frequently. It turns out to be a real problem. That's a non-starter. We don't even know what that means. He's been saying these things, and I don't know if someone should pin him more on those.
Even to the meme idea, because
what is Dawkins concerned with? Not Peterson's version of religion. He's concerned with what it does to the fundamentalists and the fact that fundamentalism is much more the dominating spirit of religion.
You don't have to extend Dawkins' work very far to understand that religious stories are memes.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Always have to focus on what people are concerned with. That's the place conversation will be meaningful. This is like very Wittgenstein. I was listening to YouTube's recently, and so I'm tempted to pronounce it like the German way, or to try, but then you sound pretentious, like William Lane Craig when he always says like Einstein and Wittgenstein or whatever. You always have to focus on what people are concerned with. I love Wittgenstein sometimes. How he's like, there's no philosophical problems. Philosophy is just the act of trying to figure out, the practice of trying to figure out where all the problems are. And a lot of the problems with things like this are they're having two different conversations. They're concerned about two different things. I said this with the Dawkins and trans video. Dawkins is concerned with language, with biology, with being able to practice his science in a productive way. Someone like Kathleen Stock is concerned with feminism, women's rights, what it means to be a woman in this unique way that women have always suffered, and she doesn't want to open women up to harm by being overly compassionate in this new way. And then other people are like, oh, that's hateful because you're causing harm to these trans people, or you're reinforcing the bigots of the past. And they need to realize that they're both concerned about slightly different things, realize where those things will overlap, where that overlap can be resolved and methodized, and that's where improvement will happen.
Well, and there's a hierarchy of memes, and some of them are very functional.
But then here's the thing, like that frustration that you're sort of throwing in that direction, I think people throw towards you when you say, well, religion, you don't have to look very far to see that religion is a meme. Well, without further clarification, and of course there's going to be it, you can understand why to somebody first listening, that sounds almost atheistic, or religion is a meme. No,
right?
Religion is not a true historical account of, the history of the universe.
It's not a true historical account.
It's a meme. Now,
Okay, that's good. He said that very casually. I feel like that's one of the things he bucks against so often. Maybe he's fine. He's using it just because it said historical or true historical account, and he considers it a different sort of account. I mean, that's kind of what they've been going over. But he said that very casually, and you feel like that runs against, for example, the Panasonic. I suspect you would see a man walk out, or the fish.
When you say that the resurrection of Jesus.
Well, what does it mean historically that the Spirit of God brooded upon the primordial waters? What does that mean historically? Well, no one knows.
I agree.
No. But people do believe that. People do believe that, and to them it validates the entire following text, which they use to do policies and teach their children. And I mean, the Islamic world would be the most obvious. I probably need to do a series on Islam. It's kind of contentious, and I don't know it as well as the Bible, Christianity. But I traveled. I lived in Egypt, Palestine, Israel, Turkey, Indonesia. I've interacted with a lot of Muslims, and I dislike Islam rather strongly. I'll be honest. I have a lot of friends that are Arabs, Muslims. I like a lot of elements of the culture, but it has to go. It can't dominate. You could just imagine, I'm writing sci-fi, kind of futuristic sci-fi set in like 200 years from now. You could just imagine that we derail, that we become some sort of theocracy, technocracy, that Islam dominates humanity as we expand into the stars. And you can imagine that being very bad and causing a lot of suffering. And Islam is still, very dogmatic and strong. Like some of these red pill people love to trumpet. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate it reproduces in the way it does because it's obviously harmful. It's harmful in the long run. It stifles innovation, creativity in its current form. Didn't always. Islamism, the recent Islamism and the recent dogma could be a new thing, corrupting the old. Of course, you can't admit that because Islam has to be the one true thing that never changed, the Quran, blah, blah, blah. But there were glorious moments in Islam, but
no one knows
I
what
agree.
that means historically.
I don't think
Right.
that at least most of Genesis or parts of Genesis are supposed to be. I mean, the Bible is a library, right? It's not a book, and that means that it's going to contain different genres.
That's for sure.
when I
Yeah,
read
and some of them are more historically accurate, and some of them tilt more towards that kind of elusive. I don't mean elusive in the. I mean ALLUSIV.
Elusive, yeah, sure.
Right, that elusive and symbolic form that characterizes Genesis 1.
So
sure.
because there are different genres here, it depends on what story we're talking about. And I
That's
think
for
that
sure.
what I often observe you doing is we might talk about Christianity, and if you aren't comfortable committing to a historical ideal, you'll start talking about the spirit moving over the face of the waters, which is obviously a much more mythological ideal, and not quite equivocating them, but moving between them too quickly and not delineating them enough. So if I asked you, do you think that the spirit moved across the face of the waters, and you said to me something like, I think it's still happening.
Right, that is what I would
I'd say,
say.
hey, fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that makes sense.
It always
However,
happens.
when
It happened at the beginning of time, and it's always happening.
When somebody
Yeah.
says, did the Exodus story happen? Did the Jews enslaved in Egypt break free of their slavery and move to the Promised Land across the desert for 40 years? Did that happen? You have also said, of the Exodus specifically, it's still happening.
Yes.
Now, to me, I asked you, do you think that
when he says, like, what does it mean that the word became flesh? And that's what's so interesting because it's spoken into being, and then it's, it's an actual incarnate body, and it walked among us and related to us, and that's so unique about Christianity. And what does that mean? And we don't know. When he says those sorts of things, he is drawing some sort of connection to this idea there's a God, spiritual realm, disembodied, word became flesh, that God was walking around, that we don't know what that means, but that it's true in some way. He's asserting that in the same sort of way that they assert the spirit brooded over the waters, and the same sort of way that they assert the loaves became, not the loaves became fish, but multiplied.
spirit moved across the face of the waters? And you said to me something
And then if Jesus said things about masters, slaves obey your masters, if they said things about stoning and blah, 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 you see religion, and if it doesn't reform, you get Islam.
like, I think it's still happening.
Right, that is what I would
I'd say,
say.
hey, fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that makes sense.
It always
However,
happens.
when
It happened at the beginning of time, and it's always
That's
happened.
what spirits and patterns are. They're the eternal kind of shape of things as perceived by our evolved sensory apparatus. And that's the most true things because it's always going to be compounded and added layers and meaning and significance, whereas the moment-to-moment changes and history can't even be known, and we are so finite. You can just say that about anything.
happening.
When somebody says, did the Exodus story happen? Did the Jews enslaved in Egypt break free of their slavery and move to the Promised Land across the desert for 40 years? Did that happen? You have also said, of the Exodus specifically, it's still happening.
Yes.
Now, to me, that's far more inappropriate than saying that the spirit is still moving across the face of the waters, because I think what people mean there is, do you believe that these people in that time period actually did this in such a way that, for instance, might show up in an archaeological report?
Well, I think that's the simplest answer to that is probably.
Sure, and that's
Right.
fine too. But then,
But we don't know.
But then-
there is, like, to the degree that there's been archaeological investigations into the kinds of biblical narratives that you've described, the archaeological evidence tends to fall on the side of historical accuracy in relationship to the Bible quite surprisingly often.
Clearly, you're. I mean, you spent more time in Exodus than probably any person I've ever met in person, right? Clearly, the story sort of captivates you, and you think it's really important and can teach us a lot, right?
Yeah,
of course,
it's infinitely deep story.
I think most people speaking to you already know that you think that, right? Mm-hmm. And so when they ask you a question, when they suddenly say to you, "But do you think it really happened?"
Well, what the hell does that mean?
You must know that what they mean is what I was talking about.
I wonder how long they're going to do this in this conversation. I feel like there's so much they could talk about. I hope they talk again, because I'm sure they could talk about psychedelics, Gnostic stuff. I'm sure they could talk about just, how to better frame things, even completely embracing Peterson's definitions of personalities and spirits and the embodiment of blah, blah. I feel like they have a lot to talk about, but so far they've been kind of cycling on this thing. I feel like if you go into a talk with Peterson, you need to have a few pointed questions to try to just narrow down the point of disagreement. Yeah, hopefully without getting him too defensive. And then, figure out where you want to go from there. Figure out what sort of constructive conversation you can build.
About a second ago, which is that sort of...
What? Okay, so fine. So it's easy just to turn this around. It's like, okay, what exactly happened in your historical account when Moses encountered the bird?
No, but he doesn't have to give one. He doesn't have to give one. First of all, you reduce it to the level of all the other myths. So what happened with Rama, with Zoroaster, with blah, 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 blah. You could pose that to Peterson, but the skeptic comes along, or the scientist, anyone comes along and says, we have a finite amount of energy, time, awareness. We have to choose what we want to do. So we choose some goals, we methodize, we scientize, we compare. Now, I don't have to prove actively that the Bible and every other myth was false to start doing that. I'm going to start with what I know, and we're going to do science about quantum physics and psychology, and Sam Harris would say mindfulness, and read the texts and learn what we can from them, but keep in mind, be open to change, not dogmatize. Peterson's the one choosing this text and this specific interpretation. He should be the one forwarding the arguments.
Encountered the burning bush.
I don't need to know exactly what happened. What I need to know is
I'm not asking you specifically
I know.
Or attacking you for that.
What I need to know is that if I sort of went to the Egyptian desert...
it's a legitimate... Peterson's rebuttal was legitimate if he's referring to specifically like Christians who would challenge him. He's like, well, what do you think happened? And he's saying they don't understand their own worldview. That's legitimate.
Sort of the time that this story is alleged to have taken place in history, would I see a mass movement of Israelites from Egypt into the Promised Land? Would I see people with feet walking through the desert, leaving footprints?
Well, let's take it apart rationally. So,
but you also understand that when
he says, well, let's get all skeptical if you want. Let's get all rational, and then, let's see what he does.
Asking that, and you even if you don't like the question, you must understand what someone's asking. Oh yes,
I understand many of the things that they're doing simultaneously.
Then you must also understand that when you then say it's still happening, people just go, what are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I would say that's not my problem.
But it becomes a problem.
So they ask him, what are you talking about? What do you think happened? I guess that's just what he talks about. He talks about the stories he thinks are meaningful and how they relate to us, and that's what he does. And maybe that's just good. I guess if you do want to disagree with him, you have to come with specific disagreements and like, how does this actually manifest in what we do with life?
You understand that someone's asking a quite banal historical question.
Yeah, but you don't get to do that.
But why not?
Because the stories that you're dealing with aren't banal.
I agree, but
so you can't reduce them to something banal, even if it's what would you call it? Even if it's reassuring, this actually happened. Then what maybe he needs to. Maybe he's been doing this, and I haven't been listening to him as much recently. But maybe he needs to just kind of refresh some of his early lecture days, where he would just say like, "What we do is fundamentally story." Talk about a bit of Taoism, talk about a bit of Hinduism, like he used to, and then just say like, "This is the way we see because blah blah blah." And I'm choosing the Christian ones right now because blah, 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 something like that. What do you do with the burning bush? So this actually happened.
One comparison I would make is between this and talking about fiction more broadly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you got it right earlier, I would say. Mm-hmm. You noted that the stories in the biblical library leap across genres.
Yes.
Right. Well, we know this because sometimes they're poetry and sometimes they're
epistles,
song.
Yeah,
exactly. And so in any given story, there's going to be historical account plus mythological overlay. And, you have to be a discriminating reader to kind of see what's different. And you don't just get to say, well, all the mythological symbolism is historical reality.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's not.
But here's the thing, for example. So like take a piece of trivial fiction like Forrest Gump.
But people do believe that. And that's what religion is. Right? What does he think? Yeah, see, if you ask him what religion is, he'll say it's a part of us. It's a part of our structure. It's a part of how we perceive. And, relationship with God is something you act out. And the ritual has to be part of it, and community and, tradition and ongoing discussion and challenging and tweaking and truth seeking. And all these things have to be a part of it. All right, that's good. That's just a way of seeing and a way of defining and playing the game that other people are not doing.
Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Right? We say like, okay, did that happen? Now, I think that what you'd probably say is something like, well, I don't think the events literally occurred, but I think that they obviously get at something that's sort of perennially true about human nature.
Exactly.
But then suppose I said
That's
to you,
right.
but hold on,
they existed as a pattern.
but there's been in Forrest Gump when,
patterns are everything. Information in patterns, information encoded in patterns. And part of that is the perception of the information, which is this other pattern that exists in the conscious space, which is where meaning emerges. Patterns are everything. Patterns are the basis for reality. Information is the language of the universe. Everything is information.
I think he meets the president. Is it JFK at the time? I think he goes and meets John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And so I said to you, well, is JFK the like that specific part of that story? Is it true that JFK was the president?
Right.
And you would probably just say, yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say anything more complicated. And even though the subject as a whole of like, is Forrest Gump true? Is Hamlet true? That's a complicated question.
Very.
But specifically, when I say, but interestingly, there's this little point I want to make in this broader discussion. Do you think that JFK was actually the president? You would say yes.
Why do you think it matters to people? Like, I don't know. These are ancient accounts. Let's
maybe
say
that's
of the
biggest
Exodus.
problem. Maybe that's the biggest problem that you have with the people who are asking these questions.
It is.
And
like,
hopefully,
what point are you trying to make here?
So
the point is, I know what the point usually is.
People want to see what he thinks. He needs to acknowledge this. People want to see what he thinks because the way he speaks appeals to things they like or dislike, and they're concerned about the influence he has, and that's legitimate. And if you're too abstract, if you're not able to connect with the masses, you're not going to be as influential as you could be.
The people who are asking the question believe that true unerringly means objectively happened in history, like the things that we're seeing right now happen.
And I resonate with this so much. I'm going to do a video on the pragmatist theory of truth. Check below. I'll link it when ready. I agree with this so much. I mean, I'm a storyteller. So much of what we do is in this meaning space, with this meeting space, where things are not literal. Literal, funny because literary story. Symbol, the perception of symbol, the transmutation of symbol to others, the ecstasy that comes when we all experience it together. That's the core of something in a way, in this kind of Advaita flowing process by which nothing truly has a shape except as it is perceived. That's the core of experience. That's the core of what we're going for. That's the only thing that we can really directly know, direct knowledge, like the Gnostics, the rituals, the things you act out, euphoria together. That provides a conception of meaning. Perhaps, in my view, the only conception of meaning, which allows you to frame truth as it relates specifically to this finite brain relating to that in this ongoing flowing process in which nothing is static, and therefore static objectively existing entities like chairs and quarks only become relevant when they are integrated into these broader experience, concept perceptual things. I don't know if that makes sense. That was bad. That was unformed. Check later.
Wow.
Check back later.
No,
So
that's not how. That's not what those stories are like.
For me,
Some of it is, but
for a Christian, when asking you that, it's probably because for them they have an understanding of Christianity that requires believing in that kind of truth. For me,
Yeah, no, that
and,
is
and the
the-
reason
that
why
is it.
I hope that like me asking these questions will be less frustrating to you is because I have no desire for that. I don't care about that. I'm genuinely just interested
Yes.
in what you think.
Yeah,
and so
understood.
my desire to know whether
Movie recording stopped. I don't know how this works. Pay me money, guys, so I can get a new camera. I have a very old camera. Money.
my desire to know whether you think Exodus historically happened goes no further than a point of interest about your beliefs.
Well, so there's elements of especially the setup to the Exodus story that strike me as very, very plausible historically.
Sorry. Seriously, though, these videos take a lot of work. I should probably be doing more like short form content. What's it called? Shorts, TikTok stuff. Networking more. Give me tips. But seriously, these videos take a lot of work. I'm so far still just having to freelance to support myself. I've moved back to the US, which is much more expensive than where I was living before. So yeah, I mean, if you think I can contribute, this is what I would like to do, part of what I would like to do, and I'd like to publish some books soon that I'm working on. And yeah, the more time I have, the more money I have, the more time I have, so that would be great.
The Jews, before the Pharaoh of that time, were under the guidance and protection of Joseph and the previous Pharaoh. And they regarded the Israelites as benefactors, because Joseph had helped save the kingdom and his people were welcome. But that was forgotten. And so the new Pharaoh and the new Egyptians regard the appallingly successful Jews as destructive interlopers, and they make them slaves. It's like, well, can you believe that? Well, it happens all the time.
Sure.
It's happening right now.
So it's
very
sounds to me that
plausible.
in this particular case, saying it's very plausible is like saying something like, well, yeah, it could have happened. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows.
So that's a cop-out. That's a cop-out when this is your whole thing, isn't it?
So when somebody asks,
saying that these are hyper-true.
did the Exodus really...
We just need to talk to him about other myths. Like, so why do you choose this myth? And then he'll talk about meaningful things. Like, well, because truth and love are a good distillation, and because the God is personal, and that's important because of XYZ in the psychological way. And he does that. He does that in his speeches. But I feel like if he butted up against the other myths, or, let's look at the secular conception, or like specific other philosophers, I feel like he would have a little more to grapple with without going through these cycles.
Really happen. That word really, when they say, like, if I just said,
really is the crux.
If I said, did the Exodus happen? And I'd understand why you would then say, well, you've got to understand what kind of story this is. Fine.
Yes.
But then if somebody says, yeah, but did it really happen?
Well, which parts of it?
Even if they're not expressing it very well, like what they're getting at there is they're trying to emphasize the historicity. They're trying to say, yeah, but did it historically happen? Probably is what they mean by the word really there.
Right. But the thing is, it speaks of they have the problem is that Christians who ask that have a metaphysics that's not Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So
no. His version of Christianity, sure, they have a metaphysics that's not like existentialist or postmodernist or pragmatist. They have a metaphysics that interprets the old texts in the typical way. And he knows what we mean by typical. And that's the typical way of metaphysics for the average person, for the masses, for people who believe and consider themselves religious. There's always intellectuals. Like Thomas Aquinas was not the same sort of Christian the average Christian is. Galileo,
non-starter.
Which is, Peterson is like a deist in an even more abstract sense, who then just uses religious language and stories to talk about psychology.
It's like, you're asking me the question a materialist atheist would ask. And you want me to give you an answer that bolsters your faith, but the presumptions of your question are Enlightenment atheistic.
So to be clear here about what he means, the existentialist tradition, that if we're not doing materialism, if we're not doing reductionism, we're not doing total, God in the sky, lightning bolts, Zeus theism. We're doing this narrow path between, which is a very philosophical path by which truth is a different thing, stories, blah, blah, blah. He needs to acknowledge that that's what he's doing, and that's not what other people are doing.
So it's like, I don't know how to play that game.
So do you think that to be a Christian...
He thinks a Christian metaphysics is what he's talking about. Other people don't. That's as simple as it is. That's why there's this disconnect.
You don't need to believe in the historicity of the Exodus or the resurrection of Jesus.
And I agree with him. I would say that to the degree that someone wants to call me a Christian, I'm that sort of Christian, and I might even consider myself that sort of Christian. But God is the thing we relate to, construct, that exists in this intersubjective space that is perhaps more true and meaningful in the way that we, or that experience is perhaps more true and meaningful than this crude matter.
For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the force around you. Here.
That's as far as I'll go. I won't consider myself a Christian.
For example.
Well, I think those are
In
separate
conversation with people who want to know what I believe.
issues, actually.
Okay, yeah, that's probably right as well. And interesting, you know, I spent last night. It's a bit of a time delay, so it feels like longer. But last night I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. I said, you know, I'm speaking to Jordan Peterson tomorrow. I was thinking, how can I prepare for this? And we ended up, my friend Sheehan's his name. We ended up having a conversation about whether Hamlet is a real person, right? And that was probably better preparation than anything else I could have done.
Yeah,
what I
well,
realized
that's a
is
good
that, like,
question.
So take if somebody asks, you know, was Hamlet a real person? Sort of naively, I say, have you heard of the story Hamlet? Oh no, is that a real person?
Right.
I would say no. However, there is a sense in which, and I'm trying to understand what you're saying here.
Yeah.
There is a sense in which there are a lot of characters, infinitely many characters that Shakespeare never wrote about.
Yeah.
Right? Those characters seem to exist less than Hamlet does.
Yeah.
Even if Hamlet exists less than Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor do in the
Hamlet might
real world,
exist
right?
more
than
me
and you.
Well, okay. One of the things
You, but not me.
One of the things you pointed to in the analysis that you did of a talk I had with Jonathan Pajot is my somewhat tongue-in-cheek comment that God is the ultimate fictional character.
Yes.
Right, which I think is a hilarious line, by the way.
Yeah.
But
by the way, I think I misunderstood. Now that I've watching that back, that's the thing I say. I think I might have misunderstood. And maybe that's what you were about to tell me. I shouldn't interrupt.
Let's walk through that.
Yeah,
because people see, and this is part of this underlying materialist, atheist, enlightenment ethos. People think that fiction and fact are opposites. It's like, no, they're not.
Okay.
Not at all. Okay, so let's...
Yes, that is true. That is important. Check the Pragmatist Theory of Truth video if I do it on that. That's important. Fiction and fact are not opposites. Fiction is a way we frame things that cannot be discussed just mathematically, or that did not actually happen in the way that, like, yesterday I went to the store. Fiction is not anti-fact. Absolutely.
Let's use an analogy to begin with. What's more real? Things or numbers?
Yes, good.
Okay, now...
Good. This is a good example.
Okay, now, I'm not going to make a case for either of those positions. I'm just saying that's an actual question.
Yeah.
You talk to mathematicians, they think, well, numbers are way more real than things.
The whole, like information is the language of the universe, or math is the language. That's the whole, like a program doesn't have any meaning. Like the specific characters in a computer code, or in everything that goes into projecting this image before my eyes, and then my eyes and going back into my brain, all those little particles are in a sense infinitely less meaningful than the emergent thing, the emergent experience. The emergent experience is dependent on them, but they're really only significant in relation to one another. And the symbols are kind of actually arbitrary. The symbols we use for computer code could be anything. It's actually the voltage, and the voltage is flipping in relation to one another that produce the overall thing. Now, the characters are the things that let us transmute it one to the other, transmit it and communicate it. So as long as we share the same language base, we're able to navigate meaning, manipulate meaning around us. But anyway, I wonder what he's saying. It's a good question.
Things are evanescent. They disappear. They flash in and out of existence. Numbers are permanent.
Yeah.
And then you could think about it biologically. It's like, well, how useful is numeracy to survival?
Yeah.
Like very, right? When you become numerate, you're powerful in a way that the mere grip you have on the individual facts doesn't afford at all. So there are forms of abstraction that are clearly more real than the things from which they're abstracted, or at least as real. I would say more real, because they're so powerful. Well, fiction is an abstraction.
Sure.
Right? And so did Hamlet exist? It's like Hamlet is the pattern of character that existed in multiple people over a very long period of time. And so Hamlet is an abstraction, like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. Did Raskolnikov exist? It's like Raskolnikov existed in the soul of every Russian from like 1850 to 1990.
Sure.
Right. And so is it real? It's like, it's hyper real.
Yeah.
Fiction is hyper real.
It's a meta truth, as you put
That's
it.
right.
It becomes, what's a good example? I need to do more videos on this. It becomes easier to think about if we do a thought experiment with something that's actually physical, like the World Cup. Like, is the World Cup real? It becomes more obvious that, I mean, it's made of gold, or is it like it's yay high? It's passed around. It has this history. It used to be in the ground. Now it's here. Someday it'll be exterminated. Maybe not. Exterminated. No, I'm getting tired. Is that what the World Cup is? Well, no, you have to talk about what it means and all the history and how it's passed around and why and the players. And that's where all the meaning is. That's what we care about. If we had something to replace it, but we believed all the same things about that thing, like if aliens came and replaced it, took it away to study and left us with an exact replica, it would no one knew. It would still be just as meaningful. Now, you know, we could prefer that didn't happen, but that's from a place of knowledge. It would still be just as meaningful. So what's the actual World Cup? Is it the story we tell and the way we see it? Is it the thing itself that the aliens took? Is it just like moment to moment changing depending on, you know, when it's passing hands and what game is being played? Is like, it's easy to see how the World Cup has to be more than the matter that makes it up. When they're talking about a fictional character, Raskolnikov, you still feel like they're talking about some kind of philosophical abstract realm, and maybe, I mean, yeah, but not really in the same way. So I feel like if you ground things in matter and you talk about what's important here, then you realize that the matter isn't actually important. A lot of times it's the story, the concept, the pattern.
In that podcast.
Now, is that real? Well,
when
Like
someone
holy
says,
water.
if they've listened to what you've just said and understood it, then if they still ask the question, but is it real? You must understand that what they mean is like, you know, did Aliona Ivanovna get hit in the head with an axe?
right.
Like, yes or no, did that happen?
Right.
And again, you could still resort to saying, you know, it happened in the heart of every Russian who's ever thought about killing their
I would say
mother-in-law.
no to that specific
But no,
question.
right? No is the answer. And
yeah.
so, and we can say no with confidence because we know that Dostoevsky sort of thought this up.
Yeah.
With something like the Egyptians walking through the desert, we can't as confidently say it's something like, no, that didn't happen. But we'd have to be more humble in saying something like, I don't know. But the comparison I made in this video, I put two questions side by side. You were asked by Douglas Murray, you know, did Raskolnikov exist? And you say, well, I think that the events literally didn't happen, but that kind of misses something and there's something more to talk about. And then you're asked, you know.
The pattern is extremely real.
Sure. Then you're asked about Cain and Abel, you know, did the story of Cain and Abel happen?
Yeah,
And
that's
it's like
better example.
a famous, you know, the question, did that happen, you know, begs the question, if you've got to consider, and you sort of, in a way that it seems strange to me that the ease with which you were able to say of Raskolnikov and Dostoevsky, well, no, that didn't literally happen, of course, but you've got to understand that there's another sense in which we've got to talk about the truth of the story.
Well, the
Someone
Cain and Abel story is quite complex because you could imagine easily that there was a fratricide at some point in the past that was of sufficient emotional magnitude to have stories aggregate around it, to have an account aggregate around it. So it's easiest to presume that because why not? It's perfectly plausible that a primordial murder of that sort happened in the memory of that tribal people and was represented in that manner. Now, as the account, and Iliad has done a very good job of pointing out how this develops too. You could think of Iliad's work on the mythologization of stories as an extension of Dawkins' idea of the meme, because Iliad discusses in great detail how an account mutates to, what would you say, to be maximally memorable across time. So it mutates. You can take, there is a core that's true, let's say in the narrow historical sense, but the account mutates to be optimally adapted to the structure of memory that characterizes the human psyche.
And that comes out in story, like the story of Cain and Abel.
Yes,
right.
That's good. That's a good description. I approve. Again, yeah, it has to do with this structure that we are. We are this structure. It interfaces with reality in this way to produce this experience, survival, blah, blah, blah. This structure is what we call the religious. This structure is defined by archetype, narrative. We have to acknowledge that that's what these are. The ones that are best, most powerful, most overarching are most fundamental and most true.
Right. And you get a maximally memorable story. Now, that's a meme. Is it true? That's a hard question because, you see,
I think Cain and Abel probably belongs more on the sort of brooding over the face of the waters category than it does Exodus category, for example. Like, so I think with Cain and
there's
Abel,
very little detail in it that would make it a specific historical event, right? I mean, because it's two generic brothers and there's a generic murder. But it's interesting too, because even in the case of a specific fratricide, let's say, that actually
really
happens in the world, well, there's all sorts of principalities involved in the background, right? So, for example, I spent a lot of time looking at Dylan Klebold's accounting of his mental state before shooting up the Columbine High School.
Yeah.
Well, if you read that, it'll make your blood run cold.
Oh, yeah.
He's obviously possessed, whatever that means.
Well, happy
Happy
to accept the word possessed.
Well, look what he did.
Knowing, in part, don't take this the wrong way, knowing that I'm speaking with you, I'm not going to take that as literally as I would if I was speaking to
literal is a very hard thing in a circumstance like that, because
I'm happy with the word
Klebold
possessed,
invited something in, and it wasn't pleasant, and it had its way with him, right? And the results, although dreadful, were nowhere near as dreadful as he was hoping they would be, right? It's dark. And is that real? So what happened there? It's like, well, one way of describing it is that, a alienated young man shot up a high school. Another way of representing it, which may be more true, is that it was another, what would you say, punctuated episode of a cosmic drama that's been going on forever.
Fine.
It could be, and it is useful to think about things in that way sometimes, but so much progress has been made stripping that stuff away, stripping away certainly the belief that some of these stories were divinely inspired and ordained, and that the stoning and slavery and whatnot was divinely ordained. Stripping that away and saying, okay, what can we, this teaches us kind of about how we evolved to see things and how we relate to one another, but, it should be open to reform. And okay, we can interpret Jesus as saying we can reform. And okay, they say like God can continue to reveal himself to us, except in Islam. And it's this ongoing conversation between like the text, the past, and the present, our scientific understanding. And when we say an alienated young man or a man possessed, it actually manifests in the brain in these patterns. And we can kind of inject this substance and fix those patterns. And so much progress has been made that way.
Fine.
And it isn't obvious to me at all which of those two accounts is more real.
Well, it depends on what specific questions being asked. For example, right now, suppose that you were a witness to this crime, and the police pull you into questioning as a witness.
Yeah.
And they say, we're trying to gather information to try and, catch the suspects. So suppose that there's no suicide involved. The suspect's at large.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get your help. And they say, so Dr. Peterson, what happened? And you say, well, I think what happened was the continuation, sort of a punctuation in the long paragraph of the cosmic drama that is our human existence. And the police sort of say,
that's not what we meant.
Okay, but come on, help me out here, man.
Yeah,
really, and I think that's what people are doing with the religious question.
Well, that's a level of analysis problem. So we went back, when we started this discussion, you talked about the infinite regress for purposes for writing an essay, right? So what are you doing when you're writing an essay? You're making horizontal and curved marks with a pen.
Sure.
Right, well, right. So, but there is a cosmic tree of events in every micro event.
Yes, I like that. Like everything is nested in this synthesis. All these chords, all these lines of information come together in the brain and the ancestors and the environment and the aim, and they produce this specific symbol that we use for these specific things. They produce this language, and that meets, in the pen and the ink in this moment, and whoever we give the letter to or the essay to, everything is infinitely connected and makes no sense unless you see it as interconnected. That's classic, Eastern stuff in many ways.
Right, and when people, when they're looking for eyewitness testimony, they're asking you for something like the highest possible level of narrow resolution you can manage. Right.
Ian McGilchrist just
that's right.
I just spoke with him, and unfortunately, I think we lost about half of the footage, so I'm not sure how much that will be seen in the world. But he brought to my attention. I'm sure he said it was John Ruskin who talked about having you see in the garden, you see like a square, and you think it's like a white square in the garden inexplicably, and then you go a bit closer and you see it's actually a page, it's a book. And then you look a bit closer and you see it's got words on it. And then you see the microscope and you see actually it's got like ridges.
Yeah.
You know, and then you go a bit closer and you actually see atoms bumping into each other. And you go a bit closer and you see sort of waves and energy.
Yeah, right.
And it's sort of like, well, which of those is the real thing you saw?
Yeah, it's like, so back to the World Cup example. You could imagine the aliens, maybe they're curious about, I'm not going to think of a good example on the fly. Shoot. Aliens see gold, or like something that humans celebrate. They think it's something else. Whatever. They have some different perception of it. They want it for different reasons, you know. That's a bad example. Okay, but I'll run with it. So aliens come down, steal our World Cup, put an exact replica in its place. Now, you can say they saw it from afar and they saw just like this object that was causing a lot of activity. Before they could even see the gold thing, before they even knew what soccer was, they could see all this human activity, electrical activity, money being exchanged because they're digitally monitoring us. They come closer and they see like, oh, they're playing these games with the ball. And then they come closer and they see like, or maybe they come closer and see the stadiums and they're like, okay, it's like hives of activity, these stadiums. And then they come closer and they see, okay, it's the humans playing with a ball. And then they come closer and they're like, okay, they're playing all these amount of games and then they take this trophy and they parade it around their streets and do crazy things. That, what's the point? Oh, yeah. So then they take it, they leave a replica. Humans go on doing the same thing. We find out eventually it was stolen by the aliens. We mount this whole rescue effort. We go fight them, confront them, whatever, become friends with them, whatever. We tell stories about this. Now, what actually happened? You could describe it all in terms of the particles in every being's head and every, electric signal that alerted them to our presence and every, process in the great saga. But you won't understand what actually happened. What actually happened is meaningless unless you have this network of what you're concerned with or how you perceive that overlaps with the humans and with the aliens. And wherever they connect, we'll be able to understand the aliens part of the story and they'll be able to understand our part of the story. And then we'll tell the story and it's always going to be framed. It's always going to only be meaningful in terms of what the patterns between these things, what these things mean to the creatures experiencing. That's us. So this is like, consummate interdependence. This is like Buddhism. This is like narrative. This is like the truth that's extracted from the particles that, are just always moving around evanescently in existence. That's not a rationalist recounting of things. But does it require dogma? Does it require faith? Depends on what you want to do with it.